Everyone. How are you? Good to see you. We're here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. Today is Saturday, and it is the afternoon, and we are so happy to be here. So much that we can discuss. Folks, we are like a little community here. We get together once a weekend. I have a good time. You all have a good time. We get through the day, we get through the week, we talk about politics, we talk about world events, we talk about history and theory and ideology. We talk about Marxism in our time, we talk about socialism, we talk about capitalism, we talk about everything that is worth discussing. And I can't tell you all how much I value all of you. I just cannot put into words how much I value the ability to do this every weekend, right? It's really a pleasure on my part to be able to get together with you all and talk about world events. Folks, we've got plenty to talk about today. Today, I want to talk about Joe Biden and who is supporting him against Trump and what's really going on with that. Folks, I want to talk today about the attack on Bernie Sanders and some of the ridiculous attacks against Bernie Sanders that are being leveled and what motivates them, what we can really learn from it. Folks, today I want to talk about the synthetic left. I've gotten requests that this concept that I've written about, it's in my book, and it's many other places I've talked about this concept of the synthetic left. I'm going to talk about that today. Folks, I'm going to talk about socialism in Vietnam and what Vietnam calls its socialist-oriented market economy and the successes there. Folks, I'm going to talk about different ideas about the ruling class and capitalism. We have so much we're going to talk about today. It's going to be great. I've got the whole afternoon ahead of me. I will not be preemptively ending this. I am going to go as long as we feel like continuing. As long as people keep talking. And let me say this, folks. I love super chats. I do love super chats, but I'm not a pole dancer. I'm not a pole dancer, as you know, right? There are plenty of people who get on YouTube Live on here, and they're pole dancers, right? How much do you know about Father Coughlin, right? That's the first super chat, and I will address it. But I'm not a pole dancer, right? I have my agenda that I want to talk about. You can send me super chats, and I'll talk about what you're interested in, and we can talk about it. But at the same time, I'm on here. I have a lot of things to talk about. So, wow, Neon Noir thinks Ho Chi Minh was a fake communist. Not only did he get it to support, I don't agree with that. But when we talk about Vietnam, we will talk about Ho Chi Minh. That will be definitely conversation. Wow, folks. Wow. So why don't we do that thing? Since we're just getting going here, people are still kind of rolling in. It's Saturday afternoon. Why don't we do that thing where I call you out as I see you? So I see Jenny Lynn. I know she's out in Ohio. I see Brian Jakowski from Buffalo. Welcome, Brian. I see Matt from Sacramento. Welcome, welcome. I see Mark Shear in North Carolina. I see Adam out in Reno. I see Robert in Hawaii. I see Afternoon in the USA. I see Tina from Wisconsin, Omar from California, Michael from Germany, hello from Cleveland, Anthony Penza in Cleveland, Arthur from Arizona, Heidi from Edinburgh, James in Seattle, Harry in Madrid, Queer Cardenist in Mexico, hello Caleb from Corona, California says Space Communist, Raphael from Portugal, Three Catfish from Utah, UK love to all comrades. Don't spend it all in one place, says Tom Mitchlack, giving me a lovely super chat. Thank you very much, Tom. West Germany, Attica. Another German here. Hi from Mexico, East Germany. From Central Texas, says Caleb McCoy. John L. in St. Louis. Leipzig, East Germany, says Etatist. From Akron, Ohio, for the last 57 years. Wow. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. This is a group experience. We should all be well aware of who is here. I'm going to have a great time. Plenty to talk about. So keep those names and locations rolling in. I see David Fernandez saying hello, everyone. Well, hello to you, David Fernandez. The plenty Austin, Texas, says George Kraft. Lots of Germans here today. Kingston, New York. Hi Peeps says two's time. Nice, RB. I've been there, but didn't stay long. Hi from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Broadway, North Carolina. Culver City, says RB. New Orleans, says Sebastian Mischinek. Southern California, says Verathius. We're going to talk about California today. It'll come in. I've been to California a few times, and it's going to come up in some of the topics I've laid out here, quite interestingly. People are saying there's lots of Germans watching today. Well, great. There's some talk I might go to a conference in Germany. I've been getting some emails and some invitations. Nothing confirmed yet. That'd be interesting. I've never been to Germany. Manchester, England, right? There was a Broadway show called Hair in the 60s. One of the hit songs was called Manchester, England, England. South Carolina, or Southern California, Kingston. Wow. Folks. I have talked extensively on these lives about a division within the American ruling class. Within the ruling class of the United States, there is a division. Now, let me first clarify. When we talk about ruling class, what are we talking about? Nowadays, there's a widespread feeling among society, among all kinds of people, that somebody else has the power. The government works for somebody other than average people. It's not a real democracy. There is some kind of elite, but who is it, right? And you get all kinds of conspiracy answers. It's the deep state. It's the Illuminati. It's the thing high up on the thing. It's the Vatican, the Rosicrucians, the reptilians. All right, Socialist Vietnam, TPP. Right? There's all kinds of feelings that there might be some kind of shadowy elite that rules the world, right? And libertarians feel this way, and, conspiracy theorists feel this way, and there's all kinds of ideas about it, right? And a lot of the people who call themselves socialists will talk about the 1%, and they'll cite Occupy Wall Street kind of rhetoric, 99%, 1%. And they think it's about income level. But the Marxist understanding of who is the ruling class, the Marxist understanding of it, is that the ruling class is those who control the major centers of economic power, the major means of production. Those who own for a living rather than working for a living. I work for a living, you work for a living, right? Those who own the major industries, the major oil companies, the major banks, the major, big box store chains, the owners of the centers of economic power are the ruling class, right? And that there are two classes in the modern capitalist world. There are those who sell their labor in order to survive. And who do they sell their labor to? They sell their labor to capitalists, those who own for a living. They own banks, they own factories, they own major industries, and they are the capitalists. And this is the divide between workers and owners, right? And the owners operate and control the means of production in order to advance their own profits. And the workers sell their labor to those owners in order to survive. They get wages, right? And we know that there are other layers, right? There's small business owners, for example. They own their own means of production, but they are not really part of the ruling class. They don't really control the economy. Somebody who owns a bar in your neighborhood, or someone who's a small shopkeeper, they're technically what you would call the petty bourgeoisie. And we also know there are people within the working class that are very, very, very wealthy, right? And because even though they're technically workers, but they have a high enough standard of living, they sympathize with their bosses. That would be the aristocracy of labor. So it's not totally that simple. But you have the working class, those of us who sell our labor to survive, and you have the capitalist class, those who own the major centers of economic power. But within the ruling class, and this is where it's very important, there is a big divide, and there has been in the United States for over a century, a divide between what you would call the entrepreneurial bourgeoisie, the bourgeoisie that is just desperate to make its own profits, the rich, and what you could call the managerial bourgeoisie, the ultra-rich, the ones that are so much more wealthy than the rest of the ruling class that they start to think in long-term rather than short-term politics, right? The first example, one of the biggest examples in U.S. history, and probably the first major example of managerial thinking among the bourgeoisie, was J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan created the Federal Reserve Bank, right? We know that it used to be on Wall Street. Every few years, they would have what they called a panic, and Wall Street would crash, and people would scramble and sell all their stock as fast as they could, and the economy would go down, and there'd be mass unemployment. Every couple of years, there would be a panic on Wall Street, and it was a problem. And at that point, J.P. Morgan, right? That's the family of General Electric. That's one of these ultra-rich ruling class families. J.P. Morgan got sitting there and he said, I really don't like the fact that we have a scramble on the stock market every few years. So I'm going to create something called the Federal Reserve Bank, which will be facilitated by the government. And when it looks like there's about to be a panic, the Federal Reserve will loan people a bunch of money and stabilize things, right? And J.P. Morgan gathered a number of bankers and capitalists at Jekyll Island, and they drew up a plan. And eventually it was ratified by Congress, and now we have the Federal Reserve System. And J.P. Morgan was rich enough to realize that if there continued to be all these panics on Wall Street, if there continued to be instability in the economy, the socialist movement would get bigger, there'd be fights, intensifying fighting in the ruling class, and, in the interest of stability and thinking long-term, not thinking about his own profits in the short term, but thinking about preserving the existing order in the long term, J.P. Morgan, one of these ultra-rich capitalists, instituted the Federal Reserve in the hopes of stabilizing the capitalist system. That is a managerial mindset. Most capitalists in the United States do not have a managerial mindset. They have an entrepreneurial mindset. They just want to maximize their profits in the short term. They are looking at how much money they are making, and they want to maximize that amount of money. They don't care. They do not care. They're not thinking long term. They're not thinking about organizing societal peace. They just want to make a lot of profits. But there is a faction, a very, very, very powerful faction of the ultra-rich in the United States that are thinking very, very long term. Very, very long term. And their goal isn't to just maximize their profits in the short term. It is to preserve the existing global financial order at all costs, and to do so in the smartest way. And their ultimate goal is to have social peace. They want social peace. They do not want unrest in society. They do not want unrest internationally. In the long term, they want to overthrow socialist and anti-imperialist governments in a long-term way, in a way that is not dramatic, that does not shake up the global financial system. They want to gradually roll back socialism. They want to stop growth around the world. They want to keep, gradually transitioning the world to a slow growth or no growth economic order. They can stay at the top of the world. Human progress can just kind of be put on hold, and they can continue to rule the world. That's one faction. That's the ultra-rich, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the DuPonts, the Morgans. That's their view. It is a managerial view. They are already as high as you can possibly get. They are far, far wealthier than the rest of the capitalist class, and in their view, it is much more important to preserve the global order that they are at the top of than to simply maximize their profits in the short term. However, most of the capitalists don't like that. Most of the capitalists are not in with them, right? And the Trump administration basically represents an uprising by the majority of the capitalist class against the managerial faction, against the ultra-rich. The ultra-rich were with Obama and the divided world, divided class. The ultra-rich were with Obama. Received, super chat received, and I will get to that. The ultra-rich were with Obama. The ultra-rich at this point are supporting Joe Biden. And the majority of the rich at this point are supporting Trump. There is a difference of interest. There's a difference of strategy. The ultra-rich are the oil banking elite. It's the Rockefeller family. It's Chase Bank. It's ExxonMobil. It's, BP, Chevron. If you look at the oil banking elite, right? The folks that are represented in the 4 super major oil companies, BP, Chevron, Shell Oil, and, of course, ExxonMobil. If you talk about the big banks on Wall Street, those folks are the faction that thinks long-term, that wants social peace, and is not deeply concerned about short-term maximization of their profits. But if you look at Trump, right, the Trump coalition is very broad and diverse. It has a lot of forces in it. But they all resent that ultra-rich faction. That ultra-rich faction that wants to use the government to ensure stability. Right? That's the divide. Right? In the Trump camp, who have you got? You got Betsy DeVos, right? She's the Secretary of Education under Donald Trump. She's a billionaire. Right? Eric Prince of Blackwater, the military contracting corporation, is her brother. And what does she want? Well, she wants charter schools. She wants, military corporations to make a lot of money. She wants to sell a lot of weapons around the world. That's what she wants, right? She can make a lot of money in the short term with charter schools. She can make a lot of money in the short term with military corporations and contractors. She can make a lot of money in the short term, with multi-level marketing schemes, right? That's her thing. She's a short-term thinking capitalist, right? Who else? Bernie Marcus, right? He's the owner of Home Depot, right? He wants to make a lot of money by selling products at Home Depot. Most of the products you find at Home Depot are made by military contracted corporations. He wants to sell a lot of weapons around the world. He wants to put small businesses out of business. He wants to pay his employees at Home Depot and other big box stores as low as he possibly can. He's interested in his short-term profits, right? There's other forces I could name in the Trump coalition, right? There are different factions there. But what separates the Trump coalition, right? You got the Miami Cubans, you got the ruling class of South America that are threatened by Bolivarianism and obsessed with rolling back Bolivarianism and don't really care about the rest of the world. You've got the Likud party faction in Israel, which has a particular interest in the military-industrial complex and Israeli weapons and all of that. It's a broad coalition, the Trump coalition, but it's factions within the ruling class. It's a broad coalition of forces within the ruling class that resent the ultra-rich. They don't like the ultra-rich. They don't like Rockefeller. They don't like Carnegie. They don't like DuPont, and they are angry at them. And they resent globalists. That's what they call the ultra-rich. They refer to them as the globalists that are thinking long-term, that are thinking managerially, they're thinking in global terms, and they're not concerned about the short-term profits of different factions. This is the division within the ruling class, the managerial ultra-rich versus the entrepreneurial rich. That's the divide among our ruling class. And the more I talk about this, the more clear it becomes. And a great example of this is the latest issue of Foreign Affairs magazine. I don't know if people know what Foreign Affairs magazine is. Well, Foreign Affairs is the publication of the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR. The Council on Foreign Relations. And the Council on Foreign Relations is a think tank that was established for the purpose. It was a think tank that was set up for the purpose of maintaining the dominance of Western capitalism in the world. And the main creators of it was the Rockefeller family. They were the main funders of it. Now, at this point, the Ford Foundation is also a big supporter of it. And it is closely tied to the intelligence agencies. People describe the Council on Foreign Relations as the CIA's brain. Right? And that's what the Council on Foreign Relations is. The CIA's brain. Neon Noir, I appreciate the super chat. Hitler was not a Rothschild, and don't put that stuff on my wall. Come on now. The Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, is the CIA's brain. They do the thinking, right? It's all kinds of academics. It's a huge think tank. The biggest think tank in the world, right? I mean, the most powerful think tank in the world, right? Members of Congress are in it. All the biggest brains of the United States. This is where neoconservatism really got going. This is where neoliberal economics really got going. You look at the CFR, it's members of Congress, it's media figures like anchors on TV are in it, big Hollywood people are in it. It's a very exclusive club, and it's a think tank, and they have closed meetings where they hire academics and they compile huge amounts of research, and they hobbled together a strategy for maintaining the dominance of Western capitalism around the world. And they put out a publication, a monthly publication called Foreign Affairs, right? This is the publication of the Council on Foreign Relations. This is what they want to put out there. And it's widely studied because this is the voice of the ultra-rich in the United States. The ultra-rich of the United States, what they believe, you will find in the pages of Foreign Affairs. And in this latest issue, they gave a big, long article to none other than Joe Biden. Joe Biden, U.S. Senator Joe Biden, former Vice President Joe Biden, they gave him a big article, and this is basically an endorsement. It's not a full-on endorsement. I'm sure there's people in the CFR who like Trump. There's probably people in the CFR who like Sanders. You know, that doesn't mean Sanders is a big puppet of some big conspiracy. I'm just telling you, there are different ideas within the CFR. But it seems like the one who is favored by the Council on Foreign Relations is Joe Biden. And it's pretty clear when they give him a manifesto, when they give him, a platform to write his manifesto, right, and to bash Trump, to lay out why he opposes Donald Trump, when they give him a manifesto like this, that's basically an endorsement. And if you read this article, it's called Why America Must Lead Again, Rescuing U.S. Foreign Policy After Trump. And you read what the Council on Foreign Relations has given Joe Biden a platform to say, you will understand the divisions within the ruling class. Right? This is Joe Biden, and I doubt he actually wrote this. It's written by his name, but I have a feeling, there's not much about corn pop and, and fighting people with chains in parking lots and cancer moonshots in here. So I have a feeling he didn't write it himself. His staff probably wrote this. But regardless, this is Joe Biden making his case for why he should be the commander-in-chief of the United States and not Trump. Quote, President Donald Trump has belittled, undermined, and in some cases abandoned U.S. allies and partners. He has turned on our intelligence professionals, our diplomats and troops. He has emboldened our adversaries and squandered our leverage to contend with national security challenges like North Korea, Iran, Syria, Afghanistan, and Venezuela. He has launched ill-advised wars against U.S. friends and foes alike that are hurting America's middle class. The rapid advance of authoritarianism, nationalism, and illiberalism has undermined our ability to collectively meet the problems he's describing. Trust in democratic institutions is down. You see that? Trust in democratic institutions is down, right? You're on here listening to me ramble about the ruling class. You're not supposed to think there's a ruling class. You're supposed to have trust in America's democratic institutions. You're supposed to have trust in democratic institutions. Oh my God. America's a democracy. Everyone knows that. There's no ruling class, Caleb. There's no ruling class, Caleb. It's a democracy. Everyone knows that. Come on. Right? You're supposed to have trust in America's democratic institutions. You're not supposed to be interested in ideas like socialism. You're not supposed to be questioning the wars. You're supposed to have trust in our democratic system. And Trump is facilitating the continued rise of people not having trust in our democratic institutions and in the international system that the United States has so carefully constructed is coming apart. Trump and dangerous demagogues around the world are leaning into these forces for their own political gain. And you read it. He's talking about what he will do, right? You go on, pages. I mean, definitely not going to read you the whole thing. One thing he's going to do is start taking in Syrian refugees, right? He will set our annual refugee admissions at 125,000, right? They understand that if they keep continuing regime change operations in Libya, in Syria, and places like that, they have to allow people to flee to the United States, right? So they're going to start taking in refugees again. That's one of their critiques of Trump, is he's not allowing refugees to come in, right? And in a lot of these countries, the people that operate and cooperate with the United States do so on the understanding that they will get to move here, right? We know that, right? That people get rewarded with visas. Well, Donald Trump's travel ban has put an end to that, right? He goes on to say, I will propose a law to strengthen prohibitions on foreign nationals or governments trying to influence U.S. federal, state, or local elections, and direct a new independent agency, the Commission on Federal Ethics, to ensure vigorous and unified enforcement. The lack of transparency in our campaign finance system, combined with extensive foreign money laundering, creates a significant vulnerability. We need to close the loopholes that corrupt our democracy, right? They don't like the notion that there is not a monopoly on crafting public opinion by the rulers of the United States, right? They don't like that now you can get on the internet and look at alternative news sources from around the world. They don't like that, and they're going to crack down on it, right? That public opinion should be crafted only by the American elite media. The mainstream American media should have the absolute authority to do that, and any other voice should be suppressed. That's basically what they're saying here. We know about the harassment and the pressure being placed on RT. We know what's been done to Chinese media and the forced registrations that are going on. They don't like the idea that anyone except the American ruling class can influence public opinion in the United States, right? They want to make sure that only Wall Street and London craft what Americans can believe, right? That's basically what they're saying here. They don't want alternative opinions. They don't want alternative voices. They don't want the other side of the story to be told. They don't want people around the world to question more. They don't want people in the United States to question more. They want an absolute monopoly on control of information. It's pretty ridiculous. Furthermore, they say today democracy is under more pressure than at any time since the 1930s. Freedom House has reported that 41 countries essentially ranked as free from 1985 to 2005. 22 have registered net declines in freedom over the past 5 years. Now, this is a big theme. Like the Wall Street Journal ran an article about a year ago that blew my mind. They talk about democratic regression around the world. This is a big theme in the literature of the ultra-rich. They talk about democratic regression. And what are the examples? The two examples they usually give of democratic regression. One, Hugo Chavez getting elected in Venezuela, and two, the rise of Vladimir Putin in Russia. Now, why are these considered to be examples of democratic regression? They say that these leaders get elected, right? And then they tamper with the independent institutions. And that can't be tolerated. Even though these leaders are elected, Vladimir Putin is wildly popular in Russia, is reelected democratically. Hugo Chavez and Maduro are democratically elected in Venezuela. But Freedom House and Joe Biden think that that represents democratic regression. Why? Because elected leaders get into power and they stop having the, intelligence agencies of the country be foot soldiers of the CIA. They use the government to control the economy and reorganize the economy, right? Putin instituted, with Gazprom and Rosneft, he created two giant state-run oil company and a gas company, two state-run energy companies, used them to reboot the economy, used the state to stabilize the Russian economy. They talk about media, right? In Venezuela, the government has created a media apparatus to counter the pro-capitalist media that is widespread in Venezuela. Independent institutions get tampered with by the state. And what they mean by independent institutions is institutions that serve the West, right? That serve Western capitalism should not be messed with, right? Venezuela's, military, Venezuela's intelligence apparatus, Venezuela's media, Venezuela's entire economy was independent in the 90s when everyone was poor and when they had free market capitalism. When Chavez got elected, he tampered with these independent institutions and made them start fighting for the Venezuelan people and fighting for socialism. So therefore, it's democratic regression, right? When Putin, right, before Putin was elected during the 1990s, when Boris Yeltsin was in power in Russia and Russia was being looted by Western companies and sex trafficking and poverty, it was an economic disaster. Well, at that point, the independent institutions were independent, i.e. serving Western capitalism. When Putin came in and started reorganizing the economy and such, at that point, it was democratic regression. This theme of democratic regression is a big theme in the propaganda of the ultra-rich and the propaganda backing up U.S. foreign policy, right? If people around the world get elected, elect leaders, you don't have to, no violent revolution here. If a government comes to power, even democratically elected, but it starts instituting policies that change the nature of society, then it stops being a democracy, according to these people. That's a huge theme. That is like the universal consensus among the American ruling class, that if someone gets into office, elected by the people, and starts changing society, it's not a democracy anymore. That's what they believe, right? And that's what Joe Biden's talking about here. That is considered a threat, right? What they call democratic regression. Freedom is under attack because it stops being freedom when Western capitalism doesn't de facto rule. That's an important point. It's a little bit complex, but it's an important thing to understand, right? No matter how democratic Venezuela is, no matter how much they allow the opposition on television, no matter how much they have elections that are internationally monitored, they've always referred to Venezuela as a brutal dictatorship. How? It doesn't even have the death penalty. How is Venezuela a dictatorship? Because they lost, right? It's not freedom if they lose. That's what you need to understand. If a government comes to power and starts fighting for the people and starts changing all the things that de facto serve our rulers of the world, all the things that de facto serve Western capitalism, if a leader gets elected with a popular mandate and starts to change that, that's no longer democracy. That's what they believe. This is the belief. They spell it out for you. I read you an article from the Wall Street Journal. They spell it out, this concept of democratic regression, right? That when the economy is bad, people start wanting things to change. And they start electing leaders that start tampering with those independent institutions. So I'm repeating myself, but that point needs to be really, really hammered home. And we hear this a lot. And Joe Biden is making that point here, right? He sees Trump as enabling democratic regression. Right? So what is he going to do? Joe Biden is going to call a global summit for democracy. He will bring together the world's democracies to strengthen our democratic institutions and honestly confront nations that are backsliding and forge a common agenda. They will be fighting corruption, defending against authoritarianism, and advancing human rights in their own nations and abroad. So basically, they're going to get together and have a meeting about making sure that no government gets elected anywhere in the world that might actually fight for its people, right? Because that's democratic regression. But it gets better. It gets better. Joe Biden goes on to say, at this summit, members will issue a call of action for the private sector, including technology companies and social media giants, which must recognize their responsibilities and overwhelming interest in preserving democratic societies and protecting free speech. At the same time, free speech cannot serve as a license for technology and social media companies to facilitate the spread of malicious lies. Those companies must act to ensure that their tools and platforms are not empowering the surveillance state, gutting privacy, facilitating repression in China, elsewhere, spreading hate and disinformation, or spurring people to violence or other misuse. So basically, he's announcing here that if he's elected, he will call an international meeting dedicated to forcing Facebook and Twitter and all of that to shut down any idea that might aid this democratic regression, i.e., wanting society to change. This is basically what he's calling for. He wants Silicon Valley and all of them to get together and do everything they can to basically prevent the spreading of ideas that challenge Western capitalism, i.e., misinformation. This is really amazing, folks. I mean, he's laying it all out there. This is public. This is not some secret document. This is foreign affairs. This is the public document, the public magazine of the Council on Foreign Relations. You can't make this up. For 70 years, the United States, under Democratic and Republican presidents, played a leading role in writing the rules, forging the agreements, and animating the institutions that guide relations among nations and advance collective security and prosperity until Trump. If we continue his abdication of that responsibility, then one of two things will happen. Either someone else will take the United States' place, but not in a way that advances our interests and values, or no one will, and chaos will ensue. Either way, that's not good for America. He talks about in the need, it goes on in the article to talk about how he doesn't like the idea of direct invasions. He says, we can be strong and smart at the same time. There is a big difference between large-scale, open-ended deployments of tens of thousands of combat troops, which must end using which must end and using a few hundred special forces soldiers and intelligence assets to support local partners against a common enemy. These smaller scale missions are sustainable militarily, economically, and politically, and they advance the national interests. He is saying the idea, invading Iraq like George W. Bush did and he voted for and supported, that's not what they want. What they want regime change operations. They want situations like Libya, situations like Syria, situations like Euromaidan in Ukraine, which, we know his son did pretty well financially as a result of, right? That they want to foment unrest in countries. They want to use the intelligence agencies and special forces to create big, long-term wars that divide countries, like in Syria, like in Ukraine, like in Libya. Like, that's the goal here, right? That it's much more effective rather than straight up invading, right? Where everyone in the country can unite against the foreign occupier. Let's try to manipulate countries. Let's try to have the intelligence agencies foment big, ugly civil wars in countries that, look at Syria. He's talking about Syria here. You look at the Syria. Before 2011, Syria was a peaceful country. Christians, Muslims, Sunnis, Shia, Alawites living in peace. But what did they do? Well, they used special forces and intelligence assets to support local partners against a common enemy, and they set up one of the ugliest wars, a war that's killed well over 500,000 people already. These smaller scale missions are sustainable militarily, economically, and politically, and they advance the national interest. I don't think it advances the national interest. The rise of ISIS has not advanced the national interest. The rise of terrorist groups has not advanced the national interest. I don't see how these smaller scale missions of destabilizing countries, fomenting unrest, prolonging conflicts as long as you possibly can, I don't see how that's in the national interest, but it's in Joe Biden's interest, right? It's different than what Betsy DeVos wants. It's different than what Bernie Marcus wants, right? They want big wars that blow things up. They want to sell weapons. But he's talking long term. How do you roll back countries like the Ba'ath government in Syria? How do you roll back countries like Libya? How do you overturn socialism in places like China? Well, you do it with this long-term, small-scale destabilization. This is the voice of the richest of the rich ruling class denouncing Trump. He says, Trump has bankrupted the United States' word in the world. He has alienated the United States from the very democratic allies that it needs most. He has taken a battering ram to the NATO alliance, treating it like an American-run protection racket. Right. We need, we should be strategic. We should keep Europe happy. No. Trump with his quote-unquote America First policies. Trump in the way that he is thinking, he's just, thinking about making money for weapons contractors and stuff. He's not thinking long-term. He's hurting the alliances, the strategic alliances of Western capitalism. And of course, who is the sinister bad guy in Joe Biden's fantasy? The Kremlin fears a strong NATO, the most effective political alliance in modern history. To counter Russian aggression, we must keep America's military capabilities sharp, also expanding its capacity to take on non-traditional threats such as weaponized corruption, disinformation, and cyber theft. We must impose real costs on Russia for its international violation of international norms and stand with Russian civil society, which has stood up against Russian President Putin's kleptocratic authoritarian system. What Russian aggression? I'm sorry, what are they talking about, right? What are they talking about? I'm sorry, where is this Russian aggression they're talking about, right? The United States was aggressive, destabilized Syria. So Russia, with the support of the Syrian government, sent its forces to back up the Syrian government against the terrorists supported by the United States in Syria. In Ukraine, we had a situation where the United States funded the Euromaidan movement, this mass protest movement that violently overthrew the elected government. And in response to that, at that point, the people in the eastern regions, and especially in Crimea, who are Russian and have been Russian, and I mean, and everyone's centered around a Russian military base, voted for independence, right? I mean, you can go back to 2008, South Ossetia, right? South Ossetia was attacked, right? A Russian-aligned territory was attacked, South Ossetia. So Russia responded, and there was a fight in Georgia, right? I'm looking for this Russian aggression he's describing. What I see here is Russia defending itself, Russia protecting its allies from American aggression. That's what I see. I'm looking for this Russian aggression he's always talking about, right? The people of a really small peninsula like Crimea, which I've been to, which is entirely centered around a Russian military base. Everyone speaks Russian. If they take a vote to join with Russia, I'm not seeing aggression there. I don't see the aggression. If the Syrian government requests Russia's support to defeat terrorism, again, not seeing the aggression here. If South Ossetia, a Russian-aligned territory, is attacked by Georgia, and then Russia responds to make consequences so Georgia doesn't do that again, I'm really not seeing this aggression, folks. Not seeing this Russian aggression, but they just say it like it's a fact. That's one thing. When things are not true, they say it like it's a fact. That's they don't want to explain it. So there is Russian aggression. Well, no, there's not. But if you just say it like it's a fact, and then if somebody questions it, well, where's this Russian aggression? Are you defending Putin? Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, it's, Venezuela, right? The brutal dictatorship in Venezuela. Wait, how is it a dictatorship? Didn't they vote? Are you defending Hugo Chavez and Maduro? Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, it's a bluff. It's a bluff, right? If you just repeat things over and over again, the fantasy is that that it becomes true. Someone's calling me transphobic and homophobic. Whatever. I don't care. I'm not, so whatever. But I'll address that. Thanks for the super chat. Now, what does Joe Biden go on to say? He says, we will lock in enforceable commitments to reduce emissions in global shipping and aviation, and we will pursue strong measures that make sure other nations cannot undercut the United States economically as we meet our commitments. Right? Fair enough, right? Climate change, whatever. But then he goes on. That includes insisting that China, the world's largest emitter of carbon, stops subsidizing coal exports and outsourcing pollution to other countries by financing billions of dollars worth of dirty fossil energy projects through its Belt and Road Initiative. Can they more blatantly expose what some of this climate change activism promoted by the richest of the rich is really about? China is going all over the world, in places like Africa, in places like Latin America, building coal power plants, bringing electricity to regions that never had it before. And that can't be tolerated in the name of climate change. China is not allowed to go to countries like Uganda, to go to countries like Angola and build coal power plants because it's bad for the environment. That's basically what he's saying here. That's basically what he's saying here, right? That's basically been spelled out here, right? That the climate change thing is being used against the Belt and Road Initiative. David Fox, thank you very much, David. Glad to have you here, and everyone else in Australia. A lot of people in Australia like me. It's kind of interesting. Hey, great. Now, he goes on. This is interesting. He says, I'm under no illusion that the Iranian regime, which has engaged in destabilizing behavior across the Middle East, brutally cracked down on protesters at home, and unjustly detained Americans. But there is a smart way to counter the threat that Iran poses to our interests and a self-defeating way. Trump has chosen the latter. The recent killing of Qasem Soleimani, the commander of Iran's Quds Force, removed a dangerous actor, but also raised the prospects of an ever-escalating cycle of violence in the region and has prompted Tehran to jettison the nuclear limits established under the nuclear deal. Tehran must return to strict compliance with the deal. If it does so, I would join the agreement. Well, that'll never happen, folks, and this is what the killing of Qasem Soleimani was about. Folks, I've said it before, but I will say it again. There were two strategies in dealing with Iran. There was the strategy of the Israeli Likud party, and there was the strategy of the Trump administration, and there was the strategy of the ultra-rich, the richest of the rich, of this faction. These folks were hoping to use soft power to pull off some kind of color revolution in Iran, open Iran up to American investment, expand American influence in Iran, find divisions in Iranian society, foment those divisions, create chaos in Iran, and eventually topple the Iranian government. That was the goal, right? And that was the goal in Cuba, right? We know that at the same time Obama was, cozying up to Cuba, at the same time the CIA was creating a Cuban Twitter and was trying to destabilize Cuba, right? This soft power strategy. What they did in Libya, what they did in Syria, is what they were trying to do in Iran and trying to do in Cuba. We know that. That's a fact. Now, what's interesting, though, is that Betsy DeVos and Eric Prince of Blackwater and who else, right? Bernie Marcus, Sheldon Adelson, they don't really care about that. They want to make lots of money by talking about the Iranian threat and selling weapons. And when Qasem Soleimani was killed, have I heard of claims about Belt and Road taking land? I've heard all kinds of claims. We'll talk about the Belt and Road and slanders about it later. When Qasem Soleimani was killed, that ended the possibility of there ever being an Iran nuclear deal again, and ended that opening for the United States to expand influence in Iran. That was such an extreme stab in the back after Iran made huge concessions at the negotiating table, to have Trump get in there, rip up the Iran nuclear deal, and then go as far as to basically kill the top military leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, kill him, right? When he's in Iraq trying to make some kind of peace agreement with Saudi Arabia, to then kill him, cowardly, not on the battlefield, but basically blow him up as he's driving to the airport, to cowardly cut down Iran's top military leader, sends a message to Iran: you can never negotiate with the United States again. The USA will not keep its promises. And it was a way that Trump could make sure that even if he leaves office, that the soft power process with Iran will never, never restart. And what does that mean? That means that there is no danger to the Likud party, there's no danger to Betsy DeVos, there's no danger to Bernie Marcus losing the lots of money they make playing up the Iranian threat, right? All those Middle Eastern, regimes, Kuwait, Jordan, United Arab Emirates, of course, Saudi Arabia, they're huge purchasers of U.S. military hardware. And if Iran were not a threat any longer, if there was some kind of détente with Iran, they would lose out on all that money. Plus, the Likud party gets elected in Israel on a platform of Iran is coming to get us, be very, very afraid of Iran. Well, if Iran and the USA and the West were to have a détente and there was no Iranian threat, they wouldn't get elected anymore, right? And so the danger was that the soft power strategy would lead to some kind of détente with Iran, U.S.-Iran negotiations, and they wouldn't be able to make lots of money in the short term off of selling weapons and scaring people with the Iranian threat. That's basically what was going on here. That the notion that Iran is a threat to Israel, is a threat to the region, Iran is going to come kill us, we should all be terrified of Iran, makes billions and billions of dollars for weapons manufacturers. It's essential. And it was in danger by the Iran nuclear deal. There was a danger of some kind of détente between the USA and Iran breaking out. And what was done with the killing of Qasem Soleimani by the Trump administration was to make sure that no possible détente could ever be established. It was to make it impossible that the Iran deal could ever be restored. That's why Trump did it. It was to nail the door shut, to make sure. And that's a disagreement within the ruling class. And Joe Biden here, while he doesn't like Qasem Soleimani, while he hates the Iranian government, he admits that it hurt their strategy. He's with Rockefeller. He's with Carnegie and DuPont. He's with the ultra-rich and with the intelligence agencies. He's not with these short-term money-making military corporations. There's a difference in the ruling class. There are divisions within the ruling class. The United States needs to do more, Joe Biden says, to ensure that these technologies are used to promote greater democracy and shared prosperity, not curb freedom and opportunity at home and abroad. He's talking about control of social media. That's like an essential part of the Joe Biden platform. As new technologies reshape our economy, we must ensure that these engines of progress are bound by laws and ethics, as we have done at previous technological turning points in history, and avoid a race to the bottom where the rules of the digital age are written by China and Russia. That's right. Wall Street and Silicon Valley should be writing the rules of social media and Facebook and the internet. Oh, no, no, no. We cannot have, multipolarity. We cannot have Russia and China having influence over social media. Social media is Wall Street's ballpark. That it is time for the United States to lead in forging a technological future that enables democratic societies to thrive and prosper. This is basically what he's saying, right? That he will fight like crazy to maintain U.S. control over social media, to maintain control over social media by the CIA, by the intelligence agencies, by the U.S. establishment, to make sure that no other voices are heard on social media. He's spelling this out. He's laying it out there. We get to the final section. He says, we are facing adversaries, both externally and internally, that are hoping to exploit fissures in our society, undermine our democracy, break up alliances, and bring about the return of an international system where might makes right. Well, I'm sorry, folks. We already have an international system where might makes right. The USA invaded Iraq in 2004, completely violated the UN Charter, aggression against a country. The whole world was saying not to do it, but the USA did it anyway because might makes right. We already have an international order where might makes right? The Wall Street imperialists, the Pentagon, they have the power. Atlanticism. We live in an international order where might makes right already. What they don't like is that Russia and China in the 20th century rose up from poverty, built themselves up, pulled themselves up by their bootstraps with centrally planned socialist economies, and they are demanding the right, Russia and China, the Eurasian superpowers, are demanding the right to be part of the international global system, and the United States will not tolerate it. And they see this as the international global system being torn apart. That's what's going on. And Joe Biden just pledged allegiance to the faction of the ruling class that sees Trump as not being a team player, not being strategic in their goals of controlling the world. That's basically what's going on there. And the fact that Joe Biden wrote that whole essay in Foreign Affairs, that shows you what is really going on. There are divisions within the ruling class right now. There are big divisions in the ruling class. And at this point, Joe Biden represents the richest of the rich, that faction that is the big oil companies, that faction that's the big major banks, that faction that controls Silicon Valley. And they don't like Trump, and they definitely don't like Bernie Sanders. Now, folks, I don't read the New York Times. I do not read the New York Times, but a good friend of mine does. I don't know how she stomachs it, but a good friend of mine does read the New York Times. And this was the Friday New York Times. The Friday New York Times, the front page. What do we have here? Very conveniently placed on the front page with a very old photograph. You think front page news, you might want like news, like things that are happening now on the front page. No. This is the front page of the New York Times. They've got a photograph from 1988. That's the year after I was born, right? And I'm 32 years old. I was born in 87. This photo is almost as old as I am. Paper details Soviet hopes for Sanders. Paper details Soviet hopes for Sanders. So they've got a photograph that is almost as old as I am of Bernie Sanders, then the mayor of Burlington, Vermont, meeting during his visit with Yaroslavl in Russia in 1988. And if you read this article, that's on the front page, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. Jimmy Dore recently came out with a compilation of Biden's historic plagiarisms. Oh, okay. We're going to talk more about Biden. There is nothing in this article. Basically, what it consists of is the fact that during the 1980s, late 80s, there was this program where American cities and Soviet cities adopted each other as sister cities. And Bernie Sanders went to the Soviet Union. And Bernie Sanders, back then, just like today, was significantly to the left of most American, politicians. And so some Soviet government people got excited and said, maybe we should make the most of this relationship. There's no scandal here. But this article, it's like it goes on, right? So you got the front page with this black and white photograph. Sanders meets with a Russian, dum dum dum, dum dum dum. And like it goes on. I mean, you read it, they spend a long time talking about this. I mean, they've got this whole big article here. I mean, goodness gracious. I mean, you should see this. I mean, big, long, and photographs and all of this. And there's nothing there. It's that Bernie Sanders went to the Soviet Union in 1988, and while he was there, Soviet government officials internally were talking to themselves and said, maybe we can have a relationship here. What's the scandal? There's no scandal here, folks. There is no scandal. I mean, but it's on the front page. There you go. Right? And what's quite interesting is the New York Times just got their hands on these documents about the Soviet government's, hopes about a relationship with Bernie Sanders. Wonder where they got them. I wonder why at this moment they just happened to acquire some documents. Wonder why at this moment they just happened to acquire some documents. You know, who is it in the United States who would have access to, like, Soviet government communications that were acquired? How did the New York Times randomly, at this moment, get their hands on old Soviet government internal communications? And why were they given to them now, at this time? And why did they then make a front page story out of it? Just saying, folks. Just saying, right? We all know that the New York Times is one of those independent institutions, right? It's one of those independent institutions. And in socialist countries, leaders get into power and they tamper with these precious independent institutions. No one controls the New York Times. No one tells the New York Times what to do. It's one of those sacred independent institutions. And it just presents all the news that's worth the print, right? Right? There's nothing. I mean, the fact that they happened to get their hands on some old Soviet documents, some old internal communications among the Soviet Union, the fact that they then put them conveniently on the front page, the fact that there's nothing really there except that, the Soviets thought, let's make the most of this relationship. He seems like a guy who might be far left or what. I mean, but this is the thing, and that's the whole thing. One of these independent institutions that dare not be touched. Folks, you can't make this up. And I mean, it gets even better, right? I mean, just to crack up, just to laugh. Right, so on top of, they've got Bernie Sanders on the front page meeting with Russian officials. In the back page, the very back page, they have an op-ed by Mark Rudd, the former leader of the Weather Underground organization. And he's reflecting on, what a mistake it was back in the 70s when they went on a bombing campaign. And he's, so amid like op-eds about, Sanders going for broke and how dangerous the far left is, they decide to throw an op-ed by a weatherman bomber on the back, just throwing it out there. I mean, why not run a historical piece? Sure, we got Bernie, we're baiting Bernie for meeting with the Russians and planting the idea that he's a far left commie on the front page. And why not throw an article about, and what's the phrase they highlight here? 50 years ago, leftist radicals like me had to face our warped mentality. Yeah, this is one of those independent institutions. One of those independent institutions. Independent institutions that just conveniently doesn't want Sanders to be the nominee and is probably supporting Biden. I'm just telling you, folks, people like to talk about this. Now, I've got a whole bunch of super chats, and I know people are going to stop sending them if I don't address them. So the first super chat I received was about Father Coughlin. Father Coughlin was a priest in Michigan. He was a Roman Catholic priest, and he was a right-wing populist and a fascist sympathizer. He was an admirer of Adolf Hitler. And his broadcasts were actually paid for by General Motors, right? We know that in Michigan during the 1930s, when Father Coughlin was there, at that point, there was the labor movement, and the Communist Party was organizing and doing its best to fight for a union and union representation for the auto workers in Henry Ford's plants and in in General Motors and the Big Three and whatnot, Chrysler. And what happened was that this guy, Father Coughlin, was very critical of capitalism in his broadcasts because he said it was unchristian, that it was an unchristian order, but the main enemy was communism. And his broadcasts are widely available. You can listen to them on the web. And I mean, he was a fascist. He was a Hitler sympathizer. And that's why he eventually got kicked off the air. But he would give these weekly sermons as this Irish priest. He had a thick Irish accent. And he, used his priest Irish accent, and he would give these sermons condemning capitalism for being greedy and immoral, but then getting to the real enemy as the communists, the real enemy as the labor unions, And it's widely available. I mean, you can listen to it, I think, on archive.org. He was a fascist. I mean, and eventually the Vatican took him off the airwaves, demanded he get off the airwaves because he was pro-Hitler. He was a Nazi. And that was, and he didn't at first he endorsed Roosevelt during Roosevelt's first run for the presidency, but then he became a fanatical opponent of Roosevelt. And that was the divide in the 1930s in the ruling class. You had Henry Ford and the National Association of Manufacturers and Henry Morgan versus the Rockefellers. And the Rockefellers were pro-Roosevelt and favored, more of a social democratic welfare state to stabilize capitalism, whereas the National Association of Manufacturers, Henry Ford, Henry Morgan, they wanted some kind of fascist regime in the United States to crush the labor movement and crush the communists. And that was a divide, and the Rockefellers won. The Rockefellers won out, Roosevelt was elected and did a lot of really good stuff. And Father Coughlin was a prominent fascist in the United States. And what's interesting is, unlike today, most of the far right today label everyone they don't like as a communist and defend free market, unregulated capitalism. Well, Father Coughlin, back in the 30s, that was at a time where so many people were literally starving. People were literally starving on the streets during the Great Depression. So saying that capitalism was the answer was not going to work. But his argument was we all need to be more Christian and more religious, and anti-Semitism, whatever. And that there was a big divide, and there remains a big divide between, local industrial manufacturers and big oil companies and banks. And the way that was articulated at that time was with Henry Ford's anti-Semitism, right? They somehow created this notion, which is false, that the big bourgeoisie are all Jews, which they're not, right? The Rockefellers are not Jewish, right? I mean, you look at some of the richest families in the world, the Morgans are not Jewish. It's anti-Semitism. It's just classic anti-Semitism, but it's this notion that all bankers are Jews and communism is a Jewish conspiracy, and so there's this big evil Jewish plot, and we need a military dictatorship by factory owners to crush those unions and fight for factory owners against bankers. That was the fascist message. That was Hitler. That was Mussolini. Mussolini didn't emphasize the anti-Semitism part of it as much, but that's fascism. It's a form of Bonapartism based on supporting factory owners and factory owners against both labor unions and socialism, but also kind of Bonapartism against, finance and capital. And that's what the fascist movements ultimately were. It was Bonapartism. And I've talked about this. And that, Hjalmar Schacht was the economist of the Third Reich in Nazi Germany. And if you look at him, who did he represent? He represented German industrialists, Krupp and Thyssen. They didn't like communists and labor unions. They also had some resentment against British banks and American banks that had been, Germany had been in debt to. That's what fascism really is. It is a certain strata of the ruling class, namely in the 1930s, it was factory owners, seizing control of the government and using the government for their own ends and trying to stabilize the economy on some level with mass death and destruction, with the creation of a prison industrial complex, with the creation of a military industrial complex, driving the population into poverty on behalf of this industrial capitalist strata. And that's what Father Coughlin was, right? That Henry Ford wanted a military dictatorship in the United States, right? Henry Ford wanted fascism, and he had this anti-Semitism. He hated communists, he hated labor unions, but he also hated the ultra rich as well, and he wanted a military state so that he could make lots of money from making weapons in the military-industrial complex, and so all those labor unions that he was eventually forced to recognize, the UAW, could be crushed, right? That's what fascism is. Father Coughlin was a fascist. I hope that answers the question I was asked about Father Coughlin. Interesting to note. It's weird. Years and years ago, I made a video as a college student comparing Glenn Beck to Father Coughlin. And Glenn Beck referenced it on the air, on one of his broadcasts. He said, there's college kids out there making videos about, saying that Glenn Beck is Father Coughlin. It's hilarious. I think that's hilarious, right? Now, who knows? Maybe there's other college kids who made videos. He didn't say my name. It was pretty weird, though. I freaked out Glenn Beck. And, Glenn Beck, in the immediate aftermath of the financial crisis, Glenn Beck, he was on this anti-communist obsession, and he was quoting people like Elizabeth Dilling, who was the head of the German-American Bund, and he was, because the main anti-communists of the 1930s were fascists and Nazis, and I wrote a lot of articles. I did a lot to call out Glenn Beck, at that point, and I assume, I hope that Glenn Beck saw my video comparing him to Father Coughlin, and that's why he referenced it. I don't know if he did. It's a little weird when I heard Glenn Beck say there's college kids on the internet making videos saying I'm the new Father Coughlin. I was a college kid. I was on the internet, and I made that video, and I couldn't find any other videos saying that Glenn Beck was the new Father Coughlin. So perhaps Glenn Beck saw my video. I don't know. Funny anecdote. Enough about Father Coughlin. Ho Chi Minh, fake communist. No, Ho Chi Minh was an anti-imperialist revolutionary. He worked with Mao in China, and people talk about, okay, well, the British aligned with him during the Second World War against the Japanese. That's true. There was an alliance between the communists and the British against Japanese invaders. That happened, but Ho Chi Minh, was the father of the Vietnamese Revolution. And when I talk about Vietnam later in this broadcast, I'm going to be talking a lot about Vietnam because I have a very, very special document. You really ought to read this. It's online. It's called Socialism and the Path to Socialism, Vietnam's Perspective. And it's written by Nguyen Phu Trong, who is the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam. It was presented at a conference in Cuba. It's a beautiful, beautiful document. And I'm going to be reading from it later when we talk about Vietnam and socialism and the socialist-oriented market economy of Vietnam. So stay tuned for that. Vietnam TPP, right. Well, there's a rivalry between Vietnam and China. The TPP is an anti-China treaty, right? That's basically what it is. The TPP, it was ripped up. It's no longer around. But the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was a proposal from the Obama administration, a trade deal they designed, would basically go to all the countries in Asia and tell them, you got a choice. Trade with China or trade with the United States. That was basically what it would do. And that was the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It was basically a way to give these countries, do you want to trade with the United States or do you want to trade with China? And when Trump got elected, to his credit, he ripped it up. He opposed it. Good for him. Vietnam was interested in it. There's a long-standing, unfortunate division between Vietnam and China. We know that in 1978, China invaded Vietnam, right? Killed a lot of Vietnamese people. That there was that whole Kampuchea War where the United States was covertly supporting Pol Pot. Pol Pot was a nutty ultra-leftist who said somehow Cambodia could have socialism without industry or factories. It could have agrarian socialism. He was a hippie, basically. Pol Pot wanted to turn Cambodia into a giant hippie farm commune and depopulate all the cities, and he was covertly getting U.S. support. U.S. money and weapons were flowing to Pol Pot. Pol Pot started killing all the real communists in Cambodia, started exterminating them, right? He was getting CIA support for doing this. At that point, Vietnam saw what was going on, that this U.S. puppet was murdering, genuine communists in Cambodia, so it moved in, right? And there was a fight. At that point, then China invaded Vietnam to protect, they said that Vietnam were puppets of the Soviet social imperialists. And they invaded Vietnam to protect Pol Pot. And it was a horrendous event. And, I think that Deng Xiaoping is an economic genius. I admire Deng Xiaoping in many ways, but his foreign policy was horrendous. And when he did that, when he invaded Vietnam, that was horrendous. But there's a long-standing rivalry between the people of Vietnam and the people of China. It goes back thousands of years. And we know that Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski, that was their bread and butter, was to figure out how to divide communists and socialists and play them against each other. And that 1978, the year when that happened, was the height of Brzezinski's influence, right? Jimmy Carter was the president. Jimmy Carter called himself a student of Zbigniew Brzezinski. Brzezinski himself was a Polish Roman Catholic who had been brought up his entire life to hate Russians, to just hate Russians. And he knew that there were people throughout Eastern Europe who had this long-standing ethnic hatred for Russians. And he figured out, right, that there were other similar ethnic divides that could be utilized against socialism. And that was what they called the Brzezinski approach, was how do you manipulate socialists and communists against each other, right? Brzezinski also is the father of Eurocommunism, right? That U.S. intelligence agencies, under Brzezinski's leadership, infiltrated communist parties throughout Western Europe and got them to cut ties with the Soviet Union, right? The right wing, the Republicans, the Nixon faction, hated all communists. All communists are against freedom. Brzezinski says, why don't we play favorites? Let's start funneling money to some more Euro-communist ones and divide them, right? Brzezinski's strategy was very different. It's kind of like what I read you from Joe Biden. The soft power, ultra-rich, have a more long-term strategy for defeating geopolitical rivals of the United States. And, playing Vietnam and China against each other was an essential part of that. And it's unfortunate. And I think that there are things that China has done to Vietnam that are not good, but there's plenty of things that Vietnam has done to China that are also not good. And that it would be great if these two socialist countries could get along, right? I don't take a side in, like, those disputed islands and stuff. I don't take a side in that, right? I'm not a puppet of anybody. I'm not a Chinese agent. I'm not a Vietnamese agent. I wish that China and Vietnam could totally get along. And things have gotten better between the two countries. It has, right? Things were really intense. They were really not getting along at one point, at the point when there was even talk of maybe a U.S. military base in Vietnam, but that's over, right? They seem to be getting along much better. The countries have moved ahead, but there's still a lot of tension there, right? 1978 was not that long ago, right? People remember. If one socialist country invades another socialist country and there are communists killing other communists, that pain, that injury doesn't go away, right? And so, it's really unfortunate. But that was a central plank of Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski's foreign policy strategy, was manipulating Vietnam and China against each other, right? I talked about that. I gave a presentation, a very good class called Mao and American Socialists. And I talked about, the strategy, the geopolitical strategy of manipulating socialist countries and the no-growth socialism that the Gang of Four was putting out. Luckily, Deng Xiaoping repudiated that. We're going to talk about all of this. It's very fascinating. Now, David Fox says that Stalin foresaw that the CIA would try to divide socialist countries. Well, I don't think, maybe he did. I wouldn't surprise me if he did. It's not that surprising to think that they would do such a thing. But the death of Stalin was really pivotal because that secret speech by Khrushchev was really demoralizing to the world communist movement. It hurt communist parties all over the world. It then laid the basis for the eventual divide between Russia and China. Khrushchev, that secret speech by Khrushchev was a pivotal turning point. It was, people talk about that being one of the most important speeches in world history. When Khrushchev got up and gave the secret speech, most of which, I shouldn't say most of which, I don't know. I know that a lot of things in the secret speech are not true. One of the things in the secret speech is, the idea that Stalin was terrified. He was just terrified. Oh, God, another super chat about Nazbols. All right, that Stalin was just terrified. Absolutely terrified. Just totally terrified and terrified and terrified when the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union. That's malarkey, right? Stalin was a bank robber. And this story in the secret speech that Stalin was crying and hiding under his desk and so afraid of the Nazis, that's bull. That didn't happen, right? And that there are other things in the secret speech. There are things in the secret speech that are very hard to verify and you don't really know, but there are some things in the secret speech that are just so obviously false. But there you go. Okay, next I was asked about divided world, divided class. Divided world, divided class. And, that's a book I've read a lot of it. It follows the theme of the book Settlers, the Mythology of the White Proletariat. It's one of these books that basically argues that the working class of the Western countries are the exploiters. That's basically the message of it. Is that just like the book Settlers, which argues that white workers in the United States are technically not workers, they're settlers, they're overseers, and they're not exploited, they benefit from imperialism. Divided World, Divided Class makes that argument not just for white workers in the United States, but for all Western workers. And I don't buy that. I don't agree with it. I mean, that's third worldism. And the thing is, the problem with third worldism is this. It points to something true. Right? Labor aristocracy is a real phenomenon. There is such a thing as labor aristocracy. And most of the existing Marxist and communist groups in the United States don't talk about it because they don't want to acknowledge it. Labor aristocracy is a real thing, but they then take this concept of labor aristocracy and they blow it up to mean things that it doesn't mean. What is labor aristocracy? What is labor aristocracy? It's very important to understand this. It's a very essential part, a very essential part of Marxist theory, of Leninism, basically, is that in the Western world, as imperialism develops, right? Capitalism on a national scale, you have factory owners, whatever, but when you have imperialism, a global system of monopoly capitalism, where a small group of Western bankers in the Western countries dominate the world economy, keeping the world poor to keep themselves rich. When you have the global system of imperialism, when that develops, at home, you have a section of the working class that sees an advance in their living conditions. Can't talk about Mark Fisher. I don't know enough about it. They see an advance in their living conditions, and because of that, they become supporters of imperialism, right? And that happens, right? There's and I mean, it happened in the United States during like the teens and 20s, but it really happened in the United States in the 1950s after Lenin was dead. Lenin describes it in his book Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. He quotes Cecil Rhodes, who says, says imperialism is a bread and butter issue. If we want to avoid a civil war, we must become imperialists. And that by creating a strata in the homeland of working class people in the Western imperialist countries who live better and see their living standard go up, they become loyal to empire, and they don't like workers even within the homeland, right? And in the United States, white workers, right, in particular, white Protestant workers in the United States had a significantly higher living standard than the African American community, most especially, but also than Eastern European workers, than Irish workers, and all of that. And that you had this strata of construction trades, so-called skilled trades that they called them, that were very right wing. Right? And that World War I, Lenin points out, wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the labor unions that represented those skilled workers with higher pay being enthusiastic supporters of the war. Right? And so that in the Western countries, you get a layer of people that you call the aristocracy of labor. They're technically working class, but because they have seen a rise in their living standard because of imperialism, because of that, they tend to have very right-wing views. And that this has been a big problem in socialism and communism and working class movements in the West, right? People wonder, why has the United States never really had, since the end of the Second World War, why is it you don't see a big working class socialist movement in the United States? You're starting to see it now, but you hadn't really had it. From like the 50s up into the 70s, you didn't have that. All right, Sukarno. All right, Sukarno, written down. All right, so you didn't really have that, right? In the 1960s political upsurge, you had among the black working class an uprising, demanding civil rights and equality and such. And then you had an uprising among college students and stuff, but you didn't see a broad working class movement in the 60s. What was that about? Well, it was about the fact that the standard of living in the United States was rising, and that this layer of white workers in the United States were seeing their living conditions increase and identified with their bosses, right? So Zach Cope and the Settlers guy and all of them are pointing to a reality that in Western countries, for a long time, this has happened. But we have entered a new stage in my class that I gave called What is Scientific Socialism? I talked about this, that the labor aristocracy is being demolished right now because of technology, because as imperialism is moving toward what you can call accumulation through destruction, we're seeing the systemic abolition and demolition of the labor aristocracy in the Western countries, which means the potential for solidarity among the working class of the world is higher than ever before. So to be talking about labor aristocracy right now is, you're missing the point. The labor aristocracy is being eliminated, and we now have a greater opportunity than ever to build solidarity. The third worldist current, they take a real phenomenon of labor aristocracy and they blow it up into something that it's not. That's what they do. And, is labor aristocracy a real phenomenon? Absolutely. Does it therefore mean that never can we have socialism in the Western countries, that it's hopeless to try and build class solidarity here? No. It doesn't mean what they say it means. And that's just the reality, right? And that Zach Cope in the book, he goes into detail about Nazi Germany, and he takes things that were kind of true about Nazi Germany and says some other things about Nazi Germany that I believe are wildly inaccurate. I don't recommend the book. I really honestly don't. And if I was the CIA, I would want that book everywhere, right? Oh, people in the USA are organizing for socialism. Well, let's give them a book that tells them it's hopeless and impossible. That's basically, and the same with settlers, right? I mean, it's like, oh, people in the USA are trying to organize and build a socialist society. Let's give them a book that says it's impossible and that all the white workers are their enemies and they should, I don't support that kind of thing, I think that there are many people who genuinely feel this way. I'm not saying these people are agents. They're not. No, I think they genuinely believe it. I think they genuinely believe what they're saying, and it's based on frustration. Folks, I can tell you, I grew up in a small industrial town in Ohio when the Iraq War was getting going, and there was nobody who was more of a third worldist than I was, because these people were in factories. Some of them were Teamsters and unionized, and they were pro-war and right-wing and hateful and nasty, and I said, I don't want these people to have a better lifestyle. They're damn exploiters and Euro settlers, and I felt that way, but conditions changed. The U.S. economy has changed. When conditions change, people are forced to, reconcile and deal with realities they hadn't been forced to deal with before. People in my town in Ohio who've lost their jobs and had their homes foreclosed are now watching 9/11 Truth DVDs. Some of them are voting for Bernie Sanders. Some of them are voting for Trump and are enthusiastic Trump people, but their consciousness has changed. That America, love it or leave it. If you don't like it here, move to some other country. That was the attitude of the labor aristocracy. Right? It's don't fix it if it ain't broke. America is a great country, and if you don't like it, you're a traitor. That kind of labor aristocracy thinking, right? That America is great and empire is great because I have a TV and I have a car. That's gone because they don't have a TV and a car anymore. Well, they do have a TV, they have a car, but you know what I'm saying, right? That the standard of living is dropping, conditions are getting worse, and I just find that stuff to not be helpful. It leads to a place of demoralization. The idea, you read that, oh, it's hopeless. We can never build socialism in the United States. Never can we build socialism in the United States. See, it's hopeless. Zach Cope explained it. Not helpful. All right, somebody isn't watching anymore and thinks I'm transphobic and homophobic. Well, I'm not either of those things. I've known people who are both transgender and people that are homosexual or gay or lesbian, bisexual, and I don't have any hostility to those folks. People can live their own life. It's not my business. You know what I'm saying? It's not my business. People can live their life that way. I don't have any objection to people being that way. And that's that. And this person doesn't watch me anymore because I feel that, I don't know where they're getting that from, and whatever. People come and go, I can't make everybody happy. I'm doing my own thing here, you like it or you don't like it, right? I want to make you happy. You all are very, very special to me as my audience. I really care about you. This is a collaboration, but I can't please everybody, and if this person, I think people should be, I don't think gay marriage should be gotten rid of in the United States. I don't think people should be stopped if people want to be transgender. That's their business. I don't know enough about it. I don't know enough about the psychology of all of that. I really don't know much about the transgender movement. And the more you look into it, the more you realize there's not a consensus. Like, other people don't know much about it either. People can have their own life, not my business, and that's about it. Whatever. I don't understand what this person seems to think their issue is. Not my concern. So the Belt and Road. They say the Belt and Road is a plot by China to steal land. I've never heard that claim before. A lot of the allegations against the Belt and Road are just pure projection. just pure projection. It's like, oh, China is trying to get countries in debt. Wonder what country. I mean, it's like China is trying to do what it's basically all the stuff the IMF and the World Bank have been doing for years. They're trying to accuse China of doing. Meanwhile, China is building up the state sector in these countries. It's industrializing countries. It's raising them out of poverty. And as I read you, Joe Biden wants to use climate change international agreements to stop China from building power plants and building, electrical power plants and building infrastructure in developing countries. He spelled it out there, basically. He wants to use climate change agreements to stop the Belt and Road, stop China from raising people out of poverty. It's spelled out. I just read it to you. Joe Biden spells it out in the CFR publication. All right, Jimmy Dore and Biden plagiarism. I think that came out, right? When Joe Biden was running for president, it was revealed that he had committed plagiarism, and then he dropped out in one of his presidential runs in like the 80s, that, it was revealed that he plagiarized some stuff in college. Well, there you go. The biggest danger of Joe Biden is not that he's, senile and might have dementia. The greatest danger of Joe Biden is not that he plagiarized in college. It's that he represents that faction, the most effective evil, the richest of the rich. That's who he represents. They don't like Trump because he's not strategic enough in running the empire, right? And that he's not as globally concerned. And they want to replace him with somebody who will manage empire more effectively. That's what's dangerous about Joe Biden. It's not that he, the other things are amusing. I'm shocked that, somebody who is that, making so many, errors in speech and stuff is getting so much support. But that shows, by the way, how much, the crafting of public opinion is very much by the richest of the rich. So the last there's two more super chats. So then I was asked about Nazbols, right? Well, first of all, so there was an organization in Russia in the 1990s, I believe, called the National Bolshevik Party. It was like a breakaway from the Russian Communist Party that explicitly believed in Russian nationalism, and they were the National Bolsheviks, and they no longer exist. They've been dissolved. They're illegal. I believe there was like a punk rock novelist who was associated with it. I think Alexander Dugin, who remains a very prominent thinker in Russia, was associated with it, and it no longer exists. And that's all there is to it. And then Nazbol is just a slur. It's just a slur that's been used on the internet. People think it means Nazi, right? That it means that you're the same thing as somehow you're a communist, but I don't really want to respect you as a communist. I want to say that you're actually a fascist, so I call you a Nazbol. Stupid internet thing. I'm not a national Bolshevik, and I couldn't be because I'm not in Russia in the 90s, and I'm not part of that party. And I don't agree with them. I'm not a nationalist. I do believe in patriotism. I believe one should love the country that they live in, but I don't believe in... I'm not a nationalist. I don't support the interests of one nation over others, and the United States is not a nation. But I believe in patriotism. I love this country. I love everyone in this country. I want to make a better life for the people of the United States. Nationalism is a specific worldview that arose in the 1800s that views the nation state as ideal and says the government should fight for the nation state. I'm not a nationalist. I do believe in patriotism, and I believe in socialism because socialism will make a better life for the people of this country. And if you don't want to make a better life for the people of this country, you don't belong in the socialist movement, right? If your socialism is about tearing this country down to make everyone pay for all the crimes of their white settler privilege, and you want to burn everything down, and you hate, you're not a socialist, you're an internet, you're a very immature person on the internet, and there you go. So now I'm being asked about Brexit. And a lot of the left, I'm sorry, it's LARPing, it's internet, adolescent rage, and it's not helpful. It's not serious politics. So that's not where I'm at. Okay, so Sukarno, right? So Sukarno, leader of Indonesia, right? Great socialist leader of Indonesia, was toppled in a coup. But yes, because he saw Indonesia's main oppressor as being the United States and Western capitalism, I understand that, yes, during the Second World War, he collaborated with Japan. Well, not good. Not good. But, Sukarno, when he was in office in Indonesia, running Indonesia, he did great things to raise the economy. When I was in Russia, I attended the World Conference of Parliamentarians, and I met people from Indonesia who still admire Sukarno. Sukarno is widely loved in Indonesia. And people don't talk about the fact that Barack Obama's father, wow, you're just throwing the super chats at me, folks. That's fine. I see. All right. Barack Obama's father was very key in the coup right? Not his actual biological father, but his stepfather. The woman his father married was part of the military that was engaging in, and the coup against Sukarno turned into a genocide against ethnically Chinese people. They started just killing whole neighborhoods of people in Indonesia that were ethnically Chinese because they thought they might be sympathizers of the communists. Barack Obama's stepfather, right, was in a military that was conducting genocide in Indonesia. I think that's amusing. Okay. All right, Brexit. What are my thoughts on Brexit? Okay, I'm in favor of Brexit. I think that the European Union is bad for the British working class and bad for the world. It's an imperialist alliance. It's an economic alliance. It's bad for British workers. It's bad for workers all over Europe. The EU is a bad entity, and that voting to get rid of it was a good thing. Now, unfortunately, I will say, a lot of the people who voted for Brexit were motivated by anti-Islamic bigotry. And I don't agree with that, right? I've been to Iran. I have a lot of good friends who are Muslims. I have a lot of respect. I have more respect for Islam than anybody. Having been to Iran, having spoken, I've spoken at events about the persecution of Shia Muslims around the world. And Islamophobia is not a good thing. However, Brexit, was a good thing. Unfortunately, a lot of the people who voted for it had bad motivations. But the fact that Brexit was voted on, and then it was like impossible to deliver on. The fact that the left was against Brexit for stupid reasons, that really discredits the left. We're going to talk about the synthetic left later in the broadcast. And that's one charge that's commonly leveled against me. And I remember in 2016, I had the conversation with somebody who's now a big cheese in the synthetic left, I guess, or maybe she used to be. And I remember I was talking to her about Brexit. And I said, well, what communists have always said, the European Union was bad, right? I mean, go back to when it was being formed. I mean, before it, right? I mean, there was a big dispute between Lenin and Trotsky, where Trotsky was advocating some kind of United States of Europe. And Lenin said, no, right? An alliance of imperialist countries is bad, right? I mean, it's just, Brexit is bad. That's just, Brexit is an alliance of imperialist countries working together to coordinate their strength to beat down the wages of workers. I mean, it's a bad thing. Brexit is bad for the British working class and for the working class of all of the countries throughout Europe. Common sense, right? But I remember in 2016, I was riding in the car. Of this woman who is one of these big Antifa synthetic left phonies. And I was in the car with her, and she was telling me that anyone who supports Brexit and is a leftist is a traitor and should be, was just ranting against any leftist who would support Brexit. And I remember she said to me, when shit gets real, Caleb, when shit gets real, some people are going to be with us, and some are going to be against us. And I remember thinking, grow up. Like, come on, this isn't Star Wars, okay? Like, come on. And a lot of that, Trump is a Nazi and we're all going to die now or never. I mean, oh, God. A lot of anti-fascism these days, what they call anti-fascism these days is childish, alarmist, and pathetic. And it's embarrassing. It's not scientific. And it refuses to recognize that Trump's victory was largely due to a failure of the left, because the left couldn't get out of anti-populism, right? Because the left remained a bohemian liberal cult, and it couldn't appeal to working class people's interests. They couldn't listen to, Bernie Sanders. It just had to be this, middle class LARP. Because of that, right, Trump filled the void. Right? And that, oh no, if we're all going to die, and I mean, it's pathetic. And in a lot of ways, a lot of the synthetic left, most of the leftists in the United States have just kind of become foot soldiers for the same people that Joe Biden works for, right? They think Trump is their main enemy, and so leftists go out and fight him in the streets for him. I don't agree with that. I'm for socialism. I'm for a mass working class movement to make the country better with socialism. But there you go. All right. Super chat. Juche. Juche is the ideology of the ruling party of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the Workers' Party of Korea. And it is Marxism-Leninism specifically applied to Korean conditions, right? And I think that every socialist country has done more or less the same thing, right? Soviet Marxism and the way it developed was very specific to that region. Chinese communism, was very different. What Mao did had never been done before with the peasantry and two-line struggle. And what Mao did was very specific to China's history and culture, right? There you go. If you want to give me a donation, you can, well, never mind. But anyway, you might want to really explain what fascism really is. I'll do that at some point. Actually, we can do that. And thank you, David. I'll do that. We'll do a fascism conversation. I've done a video on fascism, but we'll talk about that. David Fox, fascism. But yeah, I mean, Juche is an application of Marxism to Korea's unique conditions. And just like Bolivarianism is an application of Marxism to Latin America's conditions. Just like Ba'athism is an application, not really of socialism and Marxism to Arab conditions, right? And that in the United States, as we try to build socialism, we need to develop a brand of socialism that is specifically designed to address the situation in this country. Right, and that LARPing and pretending we're Soviet, we're the people of the Soviet Union, not going to cut it, right? Is there a need for an anti-fascist front? At this point, I would say no. At this point, no, Helen. I just don't think it's necessary at this point. It could become necessary. We're not dealing with fascism at this point. We're dealing with a Bonapartist fight between the bourgeoisie. But we're not on the verge of all being put in death camps and having World War III break out. Okay. Things are intensifying here in the United States. The divisions in the ruling class are intense, but no, we're not on the brink of fascism, and that'll answer that question. So, tell you what, folks, why don't I answer David Fox's question about what fascism really is? And I've done videos on this. I did a video, the actual nature of fascism, something like that, what fascism actually means. So here goes. I'm talking fast today because you guys are coming at me pretty fast, but that's okay. It's fine. So what is fascism? What is fascism? What is fascism? Right? We know fascism is, the word was invented in Italy, and it was the name that an Italian regime led by Benito Mussolini called itself. And then later, Nazi Germany, was labeled fascist. They considered themselves to be Nazis or National Socialists, but they were actually fascists. People have used fascism to describe the government of Pinochet in Chile. People have used fascism to describe, fascism. It was very similar to fascism, the government in Spain under Franco, the government of Portugal until 1975. So what is fascism? So you generally get three answers from Marxists. The first answer you get is the standard answer that you get from the communist parties of the world. Communist Party USA, Communist Party Britain, Communist Party France. The standard answer you get. Fascism is the right wing. It's, conservatives. It's the right wing becoming more right wing, right? When the right wing, and that in the 80s, the argument was that Ronald Reagan was a fascist. So it was necessary to vote for the Democrats, and that we must enter an alliance with the liberal wing of the capitalists to beat back the Republicans, right? And that's generally the answer. Fascism is Republicans becoming stronger and more authoritarian. That's wrong. The Trotskyite element will tell you fascism is a mass movement of the middle class. It's a mass movement of the middle class designed to beat back organized labor, right? It's an anti-labor militia, right? Basically, there's an element of truth in that. And there's an element of truth in the first one too, but that's wrong. Then you get this other answer. Again, element of truth in it, but it's wrong, from like ultra-left elements, Maoists, and early on, during the third period of the Communist International, in like the early 1930s, this was the Soviet definition of fascism. A lot of Maoists still use it. That fascism is if somebody sounds like a communist, but they're not, they're fascist. Right? And that was the line of the Comintern. They said that the Socialist Party was socialist in words, but fascist in deeds. The Trotskyites were socialists in words, but fascist in deeds. Right? And that was, the Comintern basically later admitted that was completely wrong. If you read William Z. Foster, if you read William Z. Foster's History of the Three International, they basically admitted that was not correct. They shouldn't have said that. But there's an element of truth in it. Right? And that, the Soviet Union, right? That the Maoists, the Gang of Four, claim the Soviet Union was fascist. Well, they say they're communist, but they're not, so they must be fascists, right? This is an ultra-left viewpoint. So those are the three definitions you get in the communist movement. That fascists are just conservative. Well, they are conservative. They are right-wing. So there's an element of truth. That's wrong. Trotskyites say, fascism is an anti-working class, a middle-class mobilization of violence to beat back labor unions. Again, very big element of truth in that. Not correct. That fascists sound like communists, but they're not. Again, a little bit of an element of truth in that. Wrong. This is what fascism is. Fascism is unrestrained, all-out violence to defeat socialism and Marxism. Let me repeat that. Fascism is all-out, unrestrained violence and terror to defeat socialism and Marxism. That's all it is. And when there's a capitalist crisis, this is what you have to understand. We haven't had a capitalist crisis in the United States since the 1930s. We are in the middle of a capitalist crisis, right? When there is a capitalist crisis, the bourgeoisie divides among itself. They have different views, right? There are some bourgeoisie that want to maintain a democratic system, or that want a more authoritarian. There are different factions among the ruling class because the capitalists become divided, right? The profits are going down. Socialism is getting more popular. People are in the streets. People are hungry. Society is becoming less stable. So factions emerge among the ruling class. And fascism is when a particular faction among the ruling class seizes power and engages in mass destruction in the hopes of staving off the crisis, right? In Nazi Germany, right, you had a section of the German ruling class, Krupp and Thyssen and the industrialists, seized control of the government, slaughtered the communists, started a military-industrial complex in the hopes of stabilizing society, right? In Italy was in a crisis, so a section of the ruling class rallied around Mussolini, installed Mussolini into power. Mussolini engaged in mass political terror and repression and killed all kinds of people, started up the armaments industry and tried to stabilize Italy, with destruction, with war, with prisons. That's what fascism is, right? And that fascism, before it comes to power, it tends to be a street movement of violence, people on the street that beat people up, and and that eventually, it's anti-communism, it's glorification of violence, and it's hoping to end a political crisis with mass destruction and violence. That's what fascism is. You read Mussolini's autobiography. It's not very deep. The politics are very shallow, but he loves violence. And his main argument, he was a leader of the Socialist Party before he became a fascist. What's his argument against the Socialist Party? They were a bunch of weaklings. They didn't want a violent revolution. You read it, you're like, but you're a fascist. You wouldn't want the socialists to have a violent revolution. You read it, the entire nature of Mussolini's thing is he loves violence. He writes, history is moved but through blood. The wheels of history are turned but through blood. It is a mass movement of violence and terror and destruction in the hopes of holding off a socialist revolution, in the hopes of restoring stability to society. Who funded Hitler? Very good question, right? Hitler was supported, number one, primarily by German industrialists, right? And in fact, let's back this up, right? Before Hitler came to power, what was Hitler? He was a German police spy. That's documented. Hitler was a German police spy. He was an unemployed veteran, and he'd been a painter. He was kind of like a weird, he'd been a painter, and he wrote operas, and he was, this weird kind of, unemployed veteran who lived in Vienna. And the German, or the police hired him to start going to different political meetings and spying on them. He was infiltrating, different groups. And one of the groups he infiltrated was something called the German Workers' Party. And he was sent there as a police spy for the German, police to infiltrate the group. And he saw that it was small. He liked their ideas. Eventually, he took it over and became the leader. And then he adopted, and as history, he eventually got supported by Krupp and Thyssen and Hallemer Schacht. He got support from the British. That's very, true. The British ruling royal family were big supporters of Hitler, right? And that we know that there was even a plot to have a Nazi coup in Britain and put on the throne, Edward the Seventh, I believe, who was a Nazi sympathizer. The British royal family, there was a particular faction in Britain that was very sympathetic to the Nazis. That's very well documented and true, and that these things happened, right? And that, yes, that a lot of Western capitalists supported Hitler. Henry Ford supported Hitler. Henry Morgan supported Hitler. And they saw Hitler as the alternative to socialism. That's basically what it is. They saw Hitler as the alternative to socialism. They saw Hitler as the alternative to socialism. Germany would have a socialist revolution, or it would go fascist. The Communist Party was a major organization. I recommended you and Michael Parenti to a friend of mine who wanted to learn. He told me that Bernie Sanders is an FDR Democrat. That's true. Yeah, well, thank you for recommending me. I really do appreciate that. That's great. What else is new, folks? So we've done that. Folks, I wanted to talk about Vietnam, right? I talk a lot about China on here, but, Vietnam is also a success story for socialism. It really is. Vietnam, right? The World Economic Forum praises Vietnam gushingly. They talk about, they wrote an article, What's Behind Vietnam's Economic Miracle? This is what they wrote, right? A mere 30 years ago, the country was one of the poorest in the world. How did this Southeast Asian nation grow to become a middle-income country? And they answer their question for themselves. Vietnam has invested heavily in human and physical capital, predominantly through public investments. Vietnam invested in its human capital and infrastructure. Facing a rapidly growing population, it stands at 95 million today, half of whom are under 35, up from 60 million in 1986. Vietnam made large public investments, primarily in education. This was necessary, as a growing population also means a growing need for jobs. Vietnam invested heavily in infrastructure, ensuring cheap mass access to the internet. The Fourth Industrial Revolution is knocking on Southeast Asia's door, and having a sound IT infrastructure in place is essential preparation. These investments paid off, right? The GDP of Vietnam has been growing at roughly 6 to 7% a year, right? And this is the World Economic Forum. Vietnam has had an economic miracle with socialism because they have a government that invests in the population. This is according to the World Economic Forum. So that brings me to this really good document that I wish more people would read this, because there are people that will say, well, Vietnam has a stock market, it can't be a socialist country. China has a lot of corporations, it can't be a socialist country. Well, this is written by the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam. And I'm glad you're with us, Lisa. I really do appreciate it, and I'm glad you recommended me. I really do appreciate it. It's great to hear from you. And if somebody wants to find the link, I tweeted it out yesterday. So if you want to find the link, you can post it in the chat. It's a really, really good document. And you read it. It describes Vietnam and socialism and the views of the Vietnamese Communist Party. And I'm going to read some selections from it. The Communist Party of Vietnam, this is what they say. As you know, socialism can be understood in 3 different aspects. Socialism as a doctrine, socialism as a movement, and socialism as a regime. Each aspect has different manifestations depending on the world outlook and development level in a specific historical period. The socialism I want to discuss here is scientific socialism based on the Marxist-Leninist doctrine in the current era. The ongoing crisis once again proves that capitalism is anti-advancement, anti-humanity, and unsustainable economically, socially, and ecologically. As Karl Marx said, capitalism damages the things that constitute its wealth, namely labor and natural resources. According to scientists, the current crisis cannot be completely resolved in the framework of a capitalist regime. Democratic regimes which follow the free democracy formula advocated and imposed in the West never ensure that the people truly belong to the people. Never ensure that the power truly belongs to the people. For the people, the natural factor in democracy. Such a power system still belongs to the most wealthy minority and serves the interests of the major capitalist groups. A very small proportion, as small as 1% of the population, holds the majority of the wealth and means of production and controls most of the financial institutions and mass media dominating all of society. We need a society where the development is truly for humans instead of exploiting and trampling on human dignity for the sake of profits. We need economic development in parallel with social progress and fairness instead of a widening gap between the rich and poor. We need a society which yearns for progressive and humane values, a society of compassion and unity, mutual assistance instead of rivalry for selfish benefits of individuals and groups. We need a political system under which power truly belongs to the people, and the people and by the people and serves the interests of the people instead of a wealthy minority. These are the authentic values of socialism, aren't they? Right? And you read it, and I would encourage you to keep reading it. He goes on at great length explaining, he says, the concept of the socialist-oriented market economy is a creative and fundamental theoretical breakthrough for our party, an important fruit of the 25-year renewal process. In a socialist-oriented market economy, there are multiple forms of ownership and multiple economic sectors. The economic sectors operating in accordance with the law are major components of the economy and equal under the law in the interest of coexistence, cooperation, and healthy competition. The state economy plays a key role. The collective economy is constantly consolidated and developed. The private economy is one of those driving forces of the collective economy. Multiple ownership, especially joint stock enterprises, is encouraged. The state and collective economies provide a firm foundation for the national economy. The relations of distribution ensure fairness and create momentum for growth and operate as a distribution mechanism based on work results, economic efficiency, and contributions by other resources and distributions through Social Security. The state manages the economy through laws, strategies, plans, policies, and mechanisms to steer, regulate, and stimulate economic development. The typical characteristic of the socialist orientation in Vietnam's market economy is a combination of economics and society, the coordination of economic and social policies, economic growth in parallel with social progress, and fairness applied at every step in every policy through the development of process. Right? Basically, he's saying, just like in China, right? They have a stock market, they have private companies, but the government controls them. Right? It's market socialism. The market exists and brings in foreign investment, and it's very useful in building socialism. But at the end of the day, the Communist Party has the power. The Communist Party controls the economy, and through doing that, makes sure that growth is unlimited. Right? It's fascinating. It's a very good document. Very good document. I'm very, very happy about it. Right? And I really encourage people to read this if you want to understand socialism. There's literature like this from China as well, but this isn't literature from Vietnam, explaining that they are communists, they are socialists, and let's be real, Vietnam has had an economic miracle with socialism. Bangladesh has not had an economic miracle, right? Haiti, with its free market policies, has not had an economic miracle. Nigeria has not had an economic miracle. Countries that maintain the rule of Wall Street and the unregulated rule of profits have not had an economic miracle. But Bolivia, under Evo Morales, had an economic miracle, right? Vietnam has had an economic miracle. China has had an economic miracle. Angola, during the 2002 to 2014, had an economic miracle. When the state controls the means of production, when the economy is organized to serve public good and not profits, growth can be unrestrained, people can be raised out of poverty, good things can happen, right? Socialism does work. And the lie that we're constantly told, that we need capitalism, everywhere that's ever had socialism, everyone's poor. I'm sorry, look at China and look at Russia, right? They both became superpowers with socialism. Compare the Cubans to the people of Haiti, the people of the Dominican Republic, the people of Guatemala, of Honduras. Right? All these people fleeing to the U.S. borders, trying to get into the United States, desperately poor in countries that have free market, unregulated capitalism. Guatemala, Honduras, countries like that, right, that have just suffered under the boot heels of free market, unregulated capitalism are dirt poor. Haiti, right, there's a country with all kinds of unregulated free market policies, dirt poor. Right? Socialism is an alternative to capitalism that has great success. And I don't know why that is off limits in the United States. I don't know why that can't be discussed. And it infuriates me that reality is ignored in the United States. And it infuriates me that the left doesn't advocate such things. And that's why I wanted to get to the synthetic left. There was a request from a good friend of the show that I talk about the synthetic left, because this is a concept that I've written a lot about. My book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, has a lot about the synthetic left in it. A lot written about it. And this is a concept that I will talk about that nobody else will talk about. It is not permitted to talk about in, I don't know why, but in leftist circles, the synthetic left. And I will lay it out for those of you that are new. I know there's a lot of people today and you're new. And please tweet this out. Please subscribe. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the like button, right? Hit the bell. Make sure you're getting the notifications, right? Because this is something you won't get anywhere else. No one else will talk about the synthetic left. I will talk about the synthetic left. Get a copy of the book. I'll talk about it. I document it, right? Folks, this is what happened. This is what happened. This is what happened. I can't make anyone a mod. I'm on my phone. You know, people are crazy. This is what happened, right? That the concept is basically this. Wherever you go in the world, you find two types of people that are socialists, that are socialist, Marxist, communist, revolutionaries. On the one hand, you have a middle-class strata of people who are angry at injustice. And this exists in any country in the world, capitalist, socialist, wherever you go. You find people that are middle class, usually younger. Some of them grow out of it, some of them don't. They're angry at injustice, they want to change the world, and they're rebellious, they want to tear things down, they want to fight injustice, they want to be heroic. That exists wherever you go, right? And it's usually less than 1 to 10% of the population. That always exists, right? And, you know, let's be real, that's where the Bolsheviks came from. That's who Fidel Castro was. That's who Che Guevara was. That it's important. You can't ignore it. And that, you know, a lot of the socialist movements, historically, you have that layer of middle-class radicals, middle-class youth radicals who want to change the world. However, they are incapable of making a revolution. They are just a small sector of society. The folks that are key in making socialist revolutions happen are not the university students who are full of rage and injustice, want to tear things down and change the world and fight for justice. Revolutions are made by the broad masses of people. By the broad masses of people. That's who makes revolutions. By the broad masses of people. That is who makes revolutions happen. And the broad masses of people make revolutions for very different reasons. Right? That bohemian middle class left, they're young, they're angry, they want to go down and tear things down, they want to be heroic. But the people who actually make the revolutions are people who aren't generally interested in politics until they're suffering. And when a capitalist crisis comes, the broad masses of people are suffering. And their lives become unstable. You know, they can't get a job, they can't feed their kids, they're being sent to die in wars, society is coming apart, and they turn to socialism and Marxism because they want order. They want to have food, they want to feed their kids, they want to not be afraid, they want the economy to be organized to serve public good, they want socialism because they want order. Right? And the brilliance of Lenin was that he was able to organize that bohemian middle class in Russia, that's who the Bolsheviks were, to affect the broad masses of people. Right? The peace, land, and bread. You read the April thesis, right? The people of Russia didn't want to keep fighting in the war. They were hungry. The peasants wanted land. So Lenin got this organization of middle-class kind of bohemians and labor activists, labor unions were a big part of the Bolsheviks, to go out and build a party that would seize, you know, the desire, you know, for order. And they were able to take power, right? But these two souls within socialism, these two trends within socialism, didn't go away. Trotsky was very much a representative of that bohemian middle class that wants to behead every last king, tear down every last wall, go out and fight like crazy. That's why he wanted permanent revolution. He wanted the Soviet Union to be just a temporary holdout in a global, you know, crusade to spread communism all over the world. He wanted to militarize the entire country. He wanted, you know, blood. That's what Trotsky was about. Permanent revolution. Whereas Stalin was for socialism in one country. And he was saying, okay, we have the Soviet Union. Let's build a socialist society in the Soviet Union. Let's have peace with the West. Let's bring in some foreign experts to help us build our industries. And let's build a prosperous society in the Soviet Union. And the overwhelming majority of the people living in the Soviet Union favored Stalin's position. They were tired of war. The Russian Civil War was horrendous. Millions of people died. They didn't have medicine. Stalin won out. But in a way, Stalin was quite conservative. Stalin, you know, during the 1920s, the Bolsheviks had very, very liberal sexual policies, right? They had, you know, homosexuality was legal, and there was, you know, a talk of abolishing marriage and all of that. Well, Stalin instituted the Soviet family, which was a mother and a father and kids. Now, the mother and father were both working. Women could go to university and get degrees, but they glorified the Soviet household, the Soviet family. Stalin outlawed abortion. Let's remember, Stalin outlawed homosexuality. And that Stalin also, in a lot of ways, brought back a lot of the admiration for Russia's history. There were movies made in Russia that glorified the old czars, for example, right? And he appealed to Russian nationalism, right? And they Alexander Nevsky and Ivan the Terrible. You watch movies from the Stalin era, they're glorifying Russia's history and Russian culture, right? And that there was a conservative side to Stalin because he was a break. Stalin was a break with that middle-class trend, right? That's just the reality. Stalin was a synthesis, right? You had the Bolsheviks that were these ultra-liberal middle-class bohemians. You had the Russian people who wanted stability and peace and had turned to the Bolsheviks to get out of the crisis of World War I and economic famines and all kinds of hardships. So Stalin was the synthesis. He was a combination. On the one hand, he represented Marxism, which is the most radical far-left thing, but he also represented the soul of the Russian people, which is deeply conservative and longing for stability and a civilization that lasts thousands of years. Stalin was a synthesis, right? That's the reality. And, after the Second World War was over, American intelligence agencies became very well familiar with the reality that there were two contradictory souls within socialism. Socialist countries, socialist revolutions are made by millions of people who want to get out of the crisis of capitalism. But socialist movements, socialist parties tend to be very popular among this middle class that wants chaos and wants instability. So there are two contradictory souls within socialism, and there always will be. I mean, that's just a reality. There always will be two contradictory souls within socialism. But the U.S. intelligence agencies figured out a mechanism for manipulating the first tendency. They figured out how to manipulate the middle-class student rebel, that faction. And they worked really hard at it, and they brag about this. I know this sounds like a conspiracy theory, folks. I know that, okay? He's talking about CIA and just Google right now the phrase Congress for Cultural Freedom. Congress for Cultural Freedom. The first thing that will come up is CIA.gov. CIA.gov. Smoking gun. And they brag about how the CIA launched a program, 1951, called the Congress for Cultural Freedom. And on that website, who do they quote? Sidney Hook. Sidney Hook, a Trotskyite professor in New York City. And that there was a huge effort to manipulate that bohemian middle-class radical strata and turn them against socialist countries. The Congress for Cultural Freedom was an entity created by the CIA with millions of dollars that funneled money into art galleries, into all kinds of things, into, movie, experimental filmmakers, the Frankfurt School, which was a Marxist school of cultural criticism in Germany, the art of Jackson Pollock. There was a Trotskyite magazine called Partisan Review that was distributed on the college campuses all across the United States. And it was about manipulating the middle-class revolutionary intelligentsia to oppose the socialist countries and expanding that contradiction between countries that are striving to build socialism and middle-class radicals. And the result has been the creation of an entity called the synthetic left. There is an entity now walking around that calls itself the left, and it is not left. It is not the left. There is an entity walking around that calls itself left-wing, that calls itself socialist, that calls itself left, and it's not left. It's anti-Marxist, It's anti-socialist. It's anti-historical progress. There is a bizarre bohemian death cult that exists in the Western world that is the creation of the CIA. It's a result of all kinds of CIA money and such, that walks around. It is anti-populist. It hates average working people. And it walks around and calls itself the left. And it's not the left. The Communist Party USA of the 1930s was an amazing organization of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who wanted to build socialism. The Socialist Party of Eugene Debs, an amazing organization of millions of people that wanted to build socialism. The Wobblies, the IWW, amazing organization, right? There was attempts in the new communist movement of the 70s to build something like the Communist Party USA or the Socialist Party again, right? That such things, the left has existed. But this entity that walks around the Western world, this entity, this counterculture, really counterculture is what it is. That entity is not the left. It's the difference between left and right is this: progress. It always has been, right? The reason that they came up with the concept of left and right was in France after the French Revolution. They formed a national assembly. And the people that were loyal to the king and feudalism in the old system, they sat on the right. And those that were enthusiastic and supportive of the French Revolution and the modern world and marching into the future, they sat on the left. If you're a conservative, you want to go backward, you sit on the right. If you believe in historical progress and getting to a higher form of civilization, you sit on the left. That's the difference between left and right. Are you for progress or are you against it? Right? And this entity emerged in the Western world that does not believe in historical progress. Let me repeat. There is an entity that emerged in the Western world, funded by the CIA, funded by the intelligence agencies, that does not believe in historical progress. And that is not the left. That is the synthetic left. And this is probably the most clear manifesto of what they believe that I have ever read. It's called The Aquarian Conspiracy by Marilyn Ferguson. Marilyn Ferguson is a spiritual guru. She was the spiritual guru of Al Gore, right? She visited the White House and hung out with Al Gore, right? This book is endorsed by all the CIA intellectuals. Carl Rogers, a psychologist with all kinds of ties to the intelligence agencies. Arthur Kessler, who published an anti-communist book for the CIA called The God That Failed. It was like an anti-communist manifesto, right? You read this book by Marilyn Ferguson, the spiritual advisor of Al Gore, is not Marxism. This is not Marxism. This does not believe in historical progress. This is not left. This is a demented death cult. This is a demented death cult. It is people who want to destroy human progress. And they have taken the place of the left. I'll read to you from it. A leaderless but powerful network is working to bring radical change in the United States. Its members have broken with certain key elements of Western thought, and they may even have broken with the continuity of history. That's the first sentence of the book. A leaderless but powerful network is working to bring radical change in the United States. That's sentence number one. Sentence number two, its members have broken with certain key elements of Western thought, and they may have even broken with the continuity of history. It goes on. There are school teachers, office workers, famous scientists, government officials, lawmakers, artists, millionaires, taxi drivers, celebrities, leaders in medicine, education, law, and psychology. Some are open in their advocacy and their names and may be familiar. There are legions of conspirators. There are corporations, universities, hospitals, on the faculties of public schools. They're in the White House staff. They're in state legislatures, in volunteer organizations. You read this. This is what the synthetic left is. This is the most blatant manifesto. 1981, I believe it was published. The paradigm of the Aquarian conspiracy sees humankind as embedded in nature, It promotes autonomous individuals in a decentralized society. Human nature is neither good nor bad, but the continuous transformation of and transcendence. Right? And where is ground zero for the Aquarian conspiracy that she spends this whole book describing? America is free, but California is freer. If America is open to innovation, innovation is California's middle name. California. And who is carrying out these operations in California? Right? In California, we are creating an aristocracy, a new aristocracy, an aristocracy of those who care. Membership is restricted only by capacity for concern. And who is carrying it out? Who is carrying it out? In Santa Barbara, the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions, the Center for the Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences in Palo Alto, and the Stanford Research Institute. CIA think tanks. The think tanks of Western capitalism are carrying out the Aquarian conspiracy. And what is further evidence that in the last chapter, the whole Earth conspiracy, it exists around the world. What's central to it? The Club of Rome. The Club of Rome. Who are the Club of Rome? The Club of Rome, they wrote a book called The Limits to Growth. And they said that the human population is just too big. There are too many people, and we need to drastically reduce the human population. We need to drastically end technology. This entity, created by Western intelligence agencies, is walking around pretending to be Marxism, pretending to be socialism, pretending to be the left. The Aquarian conspiracy, created by Western intelligence agencies, and they don't believe in essential aspects of Marxism. Historical progress is the essence of Marxism. They don't believe in historical progress. History's gone too far. It's the Tower of Babel. They worship primitivism, right? And if you look at them, who are some of the most beloved figures on the synthetic left? The Dalai Lama, who presided over a feudal, oppressive regime in Tibet that tortured people, is working, waged an ugly civil war in Tibet in the 1950s when hundreds of thousands of people died, was trying to keep feudalism intact in Tibet. Who else is a big central part of the synthetic left? The Hare Krishna movement, one of the most right-wing traditionalist Hindu sects in India. Somehow they're a big part of what it means to be a leftist in the United States, right? Julius Evola. You know the name Julius Evola? He was one of the main ideologues of Italian fascism. He wrote a book called Revolt Against the Modern World. Revolt Against the Modern World. And if you read it, it's all about admiring feudalism, right? The Tibetan regime where, there was no strikes or protests. It was so authoritarian. The Indian caste system is so beautiful. Eastern mysticism, all of this stuff that was associated with fascism in the 30s has entered the left. These entities that walk around that don't believe in historical progress, that believe there are too many people in the world, that believe that we need to go back to nature, we need to go back to some kind of Eastern primitivism, that primitivism is beautiful, modernity is evil, that favor destruction, want to reduce the human population. That entity is walking around calling itself left. It is not left. It is the synthetic left. It is a middle-class movement that is trying to drastically reduce the human population, that is trying to beat back socialism and destroy historical progress. It's the synthetic left. It was intentionally created by the CIA, and it considers communism, actual communism, to be fascism. Susan Sontag declared that communism is nothing but the most effective form of fascism. Right? They think that if you're an actual communist, you're a Nazi. And you'll notice all over the internet, Anyone who is anti-imperialist suddenly gets called a red-brown. Right? There's a lot of nasty stuff said about me, a lot of nasty stuff said about Max Blumenthal, a lot of nasty stuff said about anyone who won't join them. If you still believe in socialism, if you still believe in historical progress, if you defend socialist states, countries that are trying to raise themselves up from poverty, you are declared to be a fascist because according to the synthetic left, communism, actual Marxist governments are merely the most effective form of fascism. That's what these people believe. That is what they believe. Right? The people who saved the world from Hitler, the Soviet Union, the anti-fascist underground fighters in Germany that blew up armaments factories, that freed Jews from the concentration camps, they're all only the most successful form of fascism. That's what these people believe, that communism is just the most successful form of fascism. In my book, I quote extensively from Susan Sontag. Susan Sontag, made famous by the CIA Partisan Review. You know, they go after me, they go after Max Blumenthal, they go after the Workers' Party of Belgium, they go after the CPGBML and Jyoti Brar, they go after George Galloway. Anyone who is genuinely a socialist gets declared by these people to be a fascist because they have usurped, they declare that they are the left. They are the left, right? They are the left. This cult, this death cult that doesn't believe in historical progress, that wants to tear things down, that wants poverty, they have declared that they are the left. And if you maintain, if you still believe that the workers should control the means of production and that human history isn't over and that we can advance and we can get beyond the horrors of capitalism, they say that you're a fascist. Meanwhile, why is it that Donald Trump and the new right has hijacked all the working class anger? Because the left has been destroyed. And this entity that tells the working class they should be poorer because that's good for Mother Nature, that they deserve to be poorer. This entity that wants chaos and instability, this entity that wants to destroy Western civilization and go back to nature, this entity is not appealing to working people. I tell people to imagine this. Imagine that, some average American working class family, they're at their house one day, and all of a sudden their doorbell rings. Bing bong. Someone's knocking on the door. Who is it? Oh, hi. I'm from the local socialist and communist organization. Oh, I've never met an actual socialist or communist before. Tell me what you believe. Well, we believe that this house you have, you shouldn't live in it because material things are too good. You should be poorer. And in fact, the land that your house is on was stolen from Native Americans. And on top of that, you make too much money at your job. And while we're at it, this American flag you've got hanging in your living room, hanging out in front of your house, we're gonna burn it. You have too much stuff. And we want to destroy your life because you don't deserve it because you're a disgusting Euro settler and you value things over people and we want to make you poorer. And we're having a riot tonight around 6 o'clock. We're going to have a riot and we're going to fight with local law enforcement and we're going to burn down and destroy a lot of buildings and beat some people up. So you're interested in joining our group, aren't you? Yeah. There you go, folks. That's why the working class is turning to Trump. Because this entity, this death cult, this disgusting death cult has taken the place of actual socialism. No one in their right mind wants to join a group that wants to destroy their standard of living, that wants utter chaos and destruction, that hates them. The fake left hates the working class. There's too many of them. They're useless eaters. They need to reduce the human population. This is a cult. This is a disgusting cult. This death cult, this chaotic death cult, the synthetic left, has taken the place of the actual left. It wants to drive the standard of living down. It admires primitivism. It wants chaos. That's not socialism. Folks, I will read to you. You want to know, back in the day when the Communist Party of the United States was big and it was powerful, was their message to average Americans, we want you to be poorer, we want to tear down society and make chaos? No. Their message was, we will make your life better. And in fact, I have here, if I can get it out here, this was the election manifesto of the Communist Party USA in 1940. Right? The presidential campaign of the Communist Party, the way out, right? Capitalism was making the lives of workers unstable. It was a Great Depression. People were losing their jobs and homes and leading to a new war. And the message of the Communist Party was that they represent the way out. Right? It's fascinating. You read the election manifesto of the Communist Party from the 1940s. The way out. Right? In the 1932 presidential campaign, their slogan was a revolutionary way out of the crisis. And what did the Communist Party do? Did they go and burn shit and beat people up? And no, they organized unemployment councils. When people were hungry, they fed them. And they organized them to fight back and demand, they fought for the rights of veterans. Veterans benefits. The reason that veterans in the United States have veterans benefits is because of the bonus march, right? The bonus march that was organized by communists, right? This was, the Black Panthers, the Black Panther Party. What did they do? They had a free breakfast program. They fed hungry children. They fed hungry children. Right? The Black Panthers, what did they do? Did they want chaos? No. They wore uniforms. Military uniforms. Do you think any leftist group in the United States would ever wear uniforms? Oh no, we can't be all dressing the same. That's fascism. That's communism. It's unbelievable. Maybe I've spent too much long talking about this, but regardless, if you look at what the Black Panthers were, right? You read about how they denounced Eldridge Cleaver for his ultra-left adventurism and his fetish for violence. They denounced the Weather Underground for their terrorist campaign, right? You read about the Communist Party USA and how they organized in a time of crisis to feed the hungry people, right? They said, don't starve, fight, organize ordinary people to fight for their economic interests. It was amazing stuff, right? That was a real left. And the synthetic left needs to be gotten rid of. We need a real left. And I have tried to popularize the slogan to express a real left. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Now, someone sent me a super chat and I couldn't make sense of it. Can someone repeat what it actually said? It was the $5 one that just went through. I don't want to miss it. And I also got asked a question about Venezuela. So I'm going to talk about both of them. So what was the super chat I just missed? Caleb needs to do a parody of this to outright. No. What was the super chat I just missed? Why do you think Andrew Yang's social credit system, basically you get credit for volunteering? He calls it modern time banking. I actually haven't heard about that. I will say, I know a lot about the Chinese social credit system, and I know that a lot of what we hear about it is false. And thank you, Robert. I'm sorry I didn't see it the first time it went through. The way the social credit system in China is portrayed, the idea is, if you disagree with the government, you can't book a flight, and that's not true. The only people in China that really get hammered by the social credit system are people that have been fined, right? And the government can't collect, right? And that's a situation, that's a big problem in China. If you break Chinese law, you might be fined, right? Just like in the United States, if you break the law, you get a fine. But the Chinese government has this problem that it can't collect. And the people say, well, I just don't have the money or whatever. So until you pay your fine, you can't book a flight. But no, people are not barred from flights and trains because they posted on social media in criticism of the government. That's malarkey, okay? Yes, the Chinese social credit system, first of all, it's something that could never be implemented in this country. The Chinese system would never be implemented in this country, number one. But furthermore, the Chinese social credit system is, it's basically the idea is that the biggest economic entity in China is the government. The government controls the means of production. However, they do business with a lot of private companies, both in China and around the world. And a lot of the, for people in China, there is a division. There's a capitalist class of private capitalists in China who don't agree, basically don't like, a lot of them don't like the Chinese Communist Party. Now, some of them do. There's a division, right? And basically, it's the Chinese Communist Party keeping track of who is trustworthy and who is loyal to the Chinese Communist Party and who isn't, and prioritizing, giving priority to those who are loyal, basically. Just like corporate America does. You think if you go and apply for a job, they don't look at your Facebook, they don't look at your Twitter, they don't see, I mean, they you know, of course they do, right? You should, you know, talk about it, right? A lot of people in the USA, they get worried, oh my God, I don't want to get involved in socialist and communist groups because I don't want to, you know, lose my job. I don't want to, you know, I mean, this happens, right? Corporations, you know, go, you know, they reward and hire people who agree with their values. Why should the Chinese state not have that ability? But, you know, it would never be implemented here because, you know, that's different. But it's a big country. There's a lot of divisions. Plus, there's a lot of problems with the government not having enough power to enforce things like fines. And I'm not endorsing the social credit system. I'm just telling you the way it's portrayed, that like, oh, you bought too much alcohol, so you can't book a flight. That's malarkey. That's not what's actually happening. Now, implementing it in the United States, right? And then you get more money for volunteering. Well, I'm actually suspicious of that, I'll be honest. I like a lot of what Andrew Yang says. I read his book, The War on Normal People. It was very good. But I'm suspicious of that because volunteerism in the United States generally means taking away the job of government workers, right? That the National Service Initiative, which is something that Biden and a lot of Democrats have been talking about for a long time, you know, that entity, that National Service Initiative, basically what it is it would go to average American people, right? You know, before college, you're required to either go into the military or take a year of national service. And what would you do in that national service? You would do the job of a government worker for free. All right? It's an austerity program, all right? You would be a volunteer in your first year of life, living off your parents, doing the job of a government worker for free, right? So we can fire postal workers, we can, you know, fire, you know, sanitation workers, right? And just have all these college kids do the jobs of government workers for free. And that way, we don't have to hire as many sanitation workers, as many postal workers, as many construction, whatever. That's basically what it is. It's an austerity program. It's an austerity program, and it's wrong. I don't agree with it. I don't agree with it. National Service Initiative is very bad. And that volunteerism under capitalism is often a way to say, let's make young people do the jobs of government workers for free. They should pay people to clean our streets in New York City. They should pay them union wages to go out and clean our streets, and they do, right? But they would like to not pay for that, so they come up with a way. You know, that's what that is, volunteerism. And I you know, I don't agree. Under socialism, sure, I would agree with it. A jobs program, that would be good. Hire the unemployed, right? Put them to work. Give them union wages to work hard and build for the country. Have a government jobs program, mass state employment. That I would be for. I'm very suspicious of this volunteerism schemes. I really am, right? Furthermore, right? Furthermore, you know, social credit in the United States. What would that be? I mean, we already have the government going after social media and trying to silence people. I'm suspicious of that. I like a lot of what Andrew Yang says. I don't like that. Now, I was given another super chat about Venezuela and petrosocialism. I've been to Venezuela, and I've met with Venezuelan folks. I have a friend who goes to Venezuela very frequently. People are reading my stuff in Venezuela, by the way. Every time my friend goes to Venezuela, he takes a cartload of these. People are reading it. Venezuelan government officials read this kind of stuff. You know, this is widely read among Venezuelan Marxists. I mean, people find this to be the most advanced stuff. I mean, I talk to people. I mean, nobody in the USA left talks like I do. And when I went to Venezuela, you know, when I went to Ecuador before the current president, when Correa was still in power, you know, they said to me, "Why are American leftists crazy?" You know, I mean, they said, why is there no sensible left in the United States? Why is there no American Bolivarianism? Why is the American left so crazy and isolated? Well, it's crazy and isolated for the reasons I just laid out. And my book is an eye-opener. When people read this, they're blown away, right? That basically I have a thesis about socialism and about city builders and vandals, about the history of human civilization. And I mean, my book is very eye-opening. I talk about Marxism in a way that makes the 21st century make sense. A lot of the people that are walking around in the United States talking about Marxism have a very, very good analysis of the 1980s. Very good analysis of the 1980s. They can tell you exactly what's happening in the 1980s. What's happening today? Well, we don't know. I mean, that's basically it. Right? The fall of the Soviet Union. was largely carried out by the fact that Western intelligence agencies manipulated communists against each other, manipulated the intelligentsia and the intellectual strata in the socialist countries. We have to talk about this. It's and that, you cannot make sense of the world as it currently exists without understanding the concepts that are in here. And that's why, I gave a talk called Socialist Heroism in Our Time. And in that talk, I gave it at the Center for Marxist Education in Boston. And there was a good 20, 30 people in the audience. And those folks were blown away. And that talk, even though there's no video of it, it's just audio, is a hit on the internet. Read it. People say it's the most eye-opening thing they've ever heard, right? So there you go. And what I'm doing is unique. Nobody is doing what I'm doing, right? Down below, you've got the conference that I'm helping to organize to launch the Center for Political Innovation, the think tank I'm key in establishing. No one's doing what I'm doing. We're cutting edge here. We're doing something that has never been done before. We are breaking with the synthetic left. We're building a constructive, patriotic socialism to save the United States from the crisis of capitalism. Right? We are building a real left that believes in historical progress, that is anti-racist, anti-imperialist. We're building something really beautiful. And in order to do that, we have to break with what currently exists. Folks, let's be real. Most of the groups that currently exist in the USA, most of the communist groups, not even singling any of them out, most of them, there's a couple exceptions, but for the most part, most of the communist groups that exist are the ego trip of one or two people. Let's just be real. They're the ego trip of one or two people. And if you join and you are charismatic and you are capable of thinking, they kick you out because then you're competing with those one or two people. And that's a good way to tell none of those groups are really serious, right? Because when Lenin formed the Bolsheviks, he went to every prominent Marxist and intellectual in Russia and tried to get them to join his organization. Tried to get Trotsky to join. Tried to get these other forces to join. Right? When people want allies, they don't view you as a competitor. Right? Most of the communist groups in the United States basically view it as a business. This is a business, right? And if you are also good at what they're doing, you're a competitor. And they don't want you. You're a competitor. You're competing with the business. They view you as a competitor. That's basically how most communist groups view things. And so they don't want to merge with other communist groups because then that would be merging with another business. It's one or two people's little business. It's a little cult. It's a little cult. It's one or two people's little cult. There's usually one guy who's the very charismatic leader. Sometimes there's one or two people or a central committee. But, it's a song and dance. But at the end of the day, the group is centered around one or two people, and it's their little ego trip. And that's all it is, And I must say, I respect the people that are committed. A lot of the older folks, the baby boomers that are still in these groups, they really strongly believe in socialism. They took great risk and made great sacrifices, and I respect them. And I've been a little too harsh on them in the past, and I apologize for that. But at the same time, they're not doing what needs to be done, right? They're not doing what needs to be done, and we need something new, and that's what I'm doing. I'm building something new, and I'm working with a lot of people. When people approach me, and I get approached all the time, I'm constantly approached by new young people who agree with what I have to say and want to build something new, right? Because what I say on here is what a lot of people are thinking. A lot of people, it's weird. People become attracted to socialism and communism on their own. They get attracted to it on their own. They discover it like I did. No one in my family was a communist. Nobody in my family was a socialist. I was a kid in Ohio, in a very small town. It was almost 95% Republican, conservative, evangelical. And during the Iraq War, I was against the Iraq War, and I started reading about socialism and communism, and I was fascinated. And it was a long time before I ever met anyone from a socialist and communist group. I discovered it. And the socialist and communist groups were always a big disappointment, right? Because they don't really believe in socialism and Marxism. They've been infiltrated by the government. They've, kind of become little cults. A lot of them are putting out some little weird version of this. And the socialist and communist movement was always a big disappointment because it wasn't what I became attracted to. I read Marx. I read Lenin. I read William Z. Foster. I read Gus Hall. And what exists currently, the current communist groups don't believe in that. They're something else. They're remnants of another time. We need to build something new and exciting. And in order to do that, we have to break with what's old. But I want to unite people. I want to work with anybody. You don't have to agree with me. I mean, there's a lot of people I'm working with who disagree with me about one or two issues. And that's okay. I mean, we can disagree, but we have to build something new. And that's why the think tank is called the Center for Political Innovation, CPI, innovation, new ideas, new thinking. I want to hold forums and debate and discuss issues that are not widely discussed. I want to build something new because, I'm sorry, but, I don't want to be king of the protest cage. I don't. That's not an aspiration I have. I don't want to be part of the synthetic left. I want working families in this country that are suffering, that are worried about paying their bills, worried about their kids, worried about the future of their country, to start realizing that the answer is socialism and that they can overturn capitalism. I do not want to build a death cult. I do not want to build a movement of people that want chaos and violence in the streets and want to destroy the country. I'm a socialist because I want to save America, not because I want to destroy America. And we can talk about, I'm not going to deny America's horrendous history and even what's going on right now. I want to get rid of mass incarceration, right? The prison system here is horrendous. The racism. I'm not denying that this country was founded on slavery. I'm not denying the killing of Native Americans, but I'm saying that we need to get to a better society. We don't need death, chaos, and destruction. And so much of what, people calling themselves left believe is just chaos and destruction. Millions of people will rally around socialism if they see socialism as a way out, as a way to save them from chaos, not a way to bring chaos. Needs to be said. I was asked about Venezuela. Venezuela, again, Chavez came in to office and he said he was not a socialist. He said he believed in neither socialism or capitalism. He believed in the third way, which was whatever was best for Venezuela. He was going to build a new Venezuela, Bolivarianism, after Simon Bolivar, right? It was great. And eventually they moved towards socialism because the working class became the key factor in the coalition. Originally, it was kind of a popular front against imperialism, right? You had a lot of capitalists in Venezuela that were opposed to neoliberalism in the United States. You had the working class, you had small business owners. It was kind of a coalition that came into power to repudiate Western capitalism and neoliberalism. But the working class became central partners in that coalition. And because oil is the main commodity, they were able to use the oil to build kind of a state-controlled economy. Petro-socialism, similar to Russia, similar to Venezuela, or of course it is, but similar to Iran, similar to Libya under Gaddafi. And petro-socialism is something that you can do now, right? Our economy at this point, the global economy, is centered around oil, but it's not the answer, right? We need to get off of fossil fuels. We need to get beyond fossil fuels. So petro-socialism is something you can do now, but it's not the ultimate answer. It's a form of socialism, right? You had 20th century socialism, which was, the Marxist-Leninist state, where the state owns absolutely everything, centered around a single party and 5-year plans. That's one form of socialism, right? But you have petro-socialism. You've got socialism with Chinese characteristics. You've got Vietnam's socialist-oriented market economy. Socialism will change as the world changes. So if someone's asking me, aren't you basically an extreme social democrat? No, social democracy, and this is important. What's the difference between a social democrat and a Marxist or a socialist? Social democrats believe that that socialism just kind of naturally and gradually emerges out of capitalism. I don't believe that. I think that imperialism at this point is the main impediment to socialism, right? But the social democrats believe that the West, that the United States, Britain, Canada, these countries are the closest thing to socialism that exists, and they're spreading their more advanced, thing, and that eventually out of Western capitalism will emerge socialism. And the evidence of that is Norway and Sweden. I don't agree with that. No, I believe Western imperialism is the main thing holding back socialism. Furthermore, I don't believe that socialism just kind of naturally, one step at a time, evolves out of capitalism. I believe that socialists get elected, or they have a revolution, or whatever happens, they get control of the state, and they drastically change society. But there's an event horizon. There's a clear event horizon between capitalism and socialism, right? That when Chavez took power, and then there was the coup in 2002, and then when that coup was defeated, at that point, Venezuela went from being capitalist to socialist. Right? And, you can go down the line, right? That there is a clear event horizon where the nature of the state changes, The state changes hands. The economy functions in a different way. The state is in control of the economy. The corporations don't control the government. The government controls the corporations. So there's a clear event horizon, number one. And number two, I do not believe that Western capitalism is the most advanced. I think Western capitalism is the main impediment to socialism. It's the main thing stopping socialism. And when the Western capitalists attack a country, they're not bringing it closer to socialism, right? They're actually doing the opposite. They're holding back its economic development. So I am definitely not a social democrat. Social democracy believes in Western imperialism is progressive, number one, and social democracy believes that there is no clear line. Edward Bernstein is the father of social democracy. He was a revisionist. He called himself a revisionist Marxism. He said the movement is everything and the goal is nothing. That's social democracy, and I am not a social democrat. I don't believe the movement is everything and the goal is nothing. I believe the opposite. The goal is everything, and the movement only matters in that it gets you towards the goal, right? Edward Bernstein said, no, the movement is everything. The goal doesn't really matter. Socialism just kind of naturally will come about. The main point is to focus on the movement. No, he's wrong. The movement only matters if it's getting us closer to socialism. And that's why I've been constantly telling people to get out of the movement. Get out of the movement, right? The hippy dippy, anti-war protest cage is not getting us closer to socialism, right? Get out of the movement and get to the masses, get to the people. Bernie Sanders, right, is not part of the movement. And I'll tell you, even though he's not actually a socialist, he's done more to strengthen socialism than any movement has ever done. I have done more. Since I've been out of the movement, right? When I was in a protest cage with a couple other Marcyites, I was not getting much done. Now, I'm on social media, something I wouldn't have been allowed to do, right? I wouldn't be allowed to do these lives if I was in a Marxist group in one of these cults, right? They would, who do you think you are? You democratic centralism. We only let the great leaders at the top speak. Who do you think you are? You should be selling the books of our great leaders. It's ridiculous, right? By not being part of the movement, I'm getting far more done. I'm traveling all over the world. I'm writing books. I'm contacted people all the day. Getting out of the movement was like the best thing I ever did. Not just for me personally, but for socialism, okay? I have accomplished far more for socialism by getting out of the movement than being in the movement. The movement is a dead end, and it's a trap, okay? It's a dead end, and it's a trap that a lot of people get into, and they fall apart, and then they quit being political. I'll tell you, I know all kinds of ex-communists, and it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart. I meet people that they get into communism, they're college age, they're in their 20s, they wake up, they get into Marxism, and they join the movement. And then they get badly treated, and they get frustrated because the movement ain't going no place. It's not moving, it's a movement that doesn't move. And then pretty soon they go back to living biologically, right? Living biologically, right? I mean, they're alive. They're not dead. Their heart is beating. They're breathing, but they're not part of any political anything. They're just like anybody else. They're just going about their business. They're demoralized and they're hopeless. And you would be. That's what the movement does to people. It chews people up and spits them out, right? And it's a trap. And I tell you, I know, and I contact these people, and it's weird. One of the weirdest things about ex-communists, it's one of the weirdest things. You talk to ex-communists, and, you say to them, like, hey, the movement is a trap, but we're trying to do something exciting here. We've got all these books, and we're having a conference, and they say, yeah, and then they recite the line that they had in the movement. And you're like, well, you don't believe that anymore, right? You don't believe that anymore, you say to them, because it's weird. They got kind of brainwashed by the movement group they were in, and then they just kind of go back to living biologically, and then you try to talk sense to them, and they still believe what the movement group that they couldn't stand, and they quit the movement over. Do I know about labor notes? Yeah, I went to their conference years ago in Detroit. It's a group of people that work within the labor unions. They try to promote kind of a socialist agenda within the labor unions. Good for them. Labor unions are important. I wish that the labor movement represented more of the American working class at this point, right? The labor movement is very, very weak. But yeah, Labor Notes they have a newsletter, and they represent kind of a more radical wing of the American labor movement. They don't like the top layer of the labor movement. They don't like They don't like Trumpka and Sweeney. They're a little more radical. A lot of them are Trotskyites. There's some Maoists in there, and yeah, I know who they are, and I respect the work that they do. I mean, maybe they don't agree with me on some stuff, and that's the whole thing. I'm doing the same thing I've always been doing. I'm not going away. People always expected me to go away. That's the hilarious thing. I think a lot of people had it in their head that I was just going to go away, that I was going to start living biologically. I can't do that, right? Socialism, Marxism, anti-imperialism helps me understand the world. I'm not going to give this stuff up, right? People expected that I would be like all these burnouts. I saw it constantly, that young people would join the socialist group I was in for 1 or 2 years, and then they would just go back to living biologically, and they'd hate socialism, but they'd still kind of believe all the stuff the group said, except they didn't live it anymore. It's not me. Not me. I'm still here. I'm 32 years old. I'm still doing this, right? If this was a phase in my 20s, I would have moved on. But the reason I'm still doing this is because it shouldn't be a phase in your 20s. That's the problem. That's the effing problem. I almost got fired up there. But for so many people, socialism, the synthetic left, this stuff is a phase in your 20s. I'm telling you the truth. This is a phase in your 20s. Only a deranged 20-year-old can join a cult like this and think that somehow there's anything redeeming about this. If this is what socialism is to you, the synthetic left, yeah, you grow out of it. Yeah, of course you do, right? People don't want chaos. They don't want violence. They don't want to hate the neighborhood that they live in, right? They don't. And if that's what socialism is, if socialism is a death cult about destroying civilization and going back to nature, of course you would quit. Of course you would move on after you're 21, 22, and then you grow out of it. I would hope you would. If you keep going with it, there might be something wrong with you. But for me, who read Foster and Hall and Huey Newton, it's not a phase in my 20s. I'm an actual socialist. One of the best experiences I ever had, probably the biggest game changer for me, the biggest game changer in my political evolution was in 2013. 2013, I was invited to go to the World Festival of Youth and Students in Quito, Ecuador, the gathering of communist youth from around the world. Right? The World Democratic Youth Federation, the World Festival of Youth and Students, the International Union of Students. It's these big UN international federations. So I went to the World Festival of Youth and Students, an international communist youth gathering that happens all over the world. It happens all over the world. It's, they have it in a different country every time, happens every 4 years. And I went to it, and my mind was blown. First of all, why was my mind blown? Well, because this was the first time I met communists from, Angola, communists from Vietnam, communists from South Africa, communists from Bolivia, communists from Venezuela, communists from Cuba, communists from China, communists from all kinds of countries. I mean, all over the world. Over 200 countries, right? Communists from Russia, communists from Ukraine, communists from Belgium, communists from Britain, And what blew my mind was that, first of all, one of the first things I tell people I think is important, right? I met communists from Namibia, from SWAPO, right? The Southwest African People's Organization. Communists from the MPLA. Our literature, we had books about gay rights. We had books about the overthrow, the evils of American imperialism and stuff. And you would go to these tables by communists from Sierra Leone and communists from the Ivory Coast, and they would have books that said things like stay in school, don't do drugs. You meet communists from India, the Communist Party of India, Marxist, or the Socialist Unity Center of India. You talk to them, these people are really serious politicians. And I would talk to them. I talked to communists from Vietnam. I talked to communists from Bangladesh. I talked to communists from Zimbabwe. These people represent millions of people, and they have the task of actually trying to raise their people out of poverty. And they're a different brand. In the United States, there are two kinds of socialists, right? Socialist groups. On the one hand, you've got people that are not really, I mean, they're not really revolutionary. They vote for the Democrats. They're in their local Democratic club. They read Marx once a year on May Day. They're normal Democrats, but they think they're socialists. And then on the other hand, you've got nuts, right? People that, burn the American flag and, have big pictures of Trotsky and, that's the choice, right? But when I met like the Communist Party of India Marxist, when I met the communists of Vietnam, when I met the communists of Cuba, the communists of Venezuela, the communists of South Africa, these people are neither of those things. On the one hand, they're really socialists. They know Marx and Lenin. They're ideological. They're thinking every day about socialism and Marxism and how to save their country from poverty, on the one hand. On the second hand, they're not nuts. They represent millions of people. They speak in a very clear and precise way. They're very serious about what they're doing. They believe in historical progress. They're not synthetic left. They're a different brand. They're serious revolutionaries. And they wear suits and ties. No, they don't wear ripped up jeans and punk rock t-shirts. They wear suits and ties. And they are ideological, right? That was, constantly leveled against me in the movement was this allegation, you read books, that's not really Marxist, and, facts are racist, and you must be an autistic white male because, nobody reads books, that's not, it was like this constant anti-intellectualism. It's about the movement, Caleb, all those books you're reading, all those understanding of economics, that's not real social, real socialists are just liberal activists like us, you're a nerd. That was constantly thrown at me. I was too smart to be a socialist. I should have been stupider. It was like, it's weird, right? These people that smoke a lot of pot and dance and party and like they think protesting is fun because it's chaotic. They didn't much care for me, but I was a lot like these. And when I would meet with communists from Vietnam, or meet with communists from Venezuela, or meet with communists from India, or meet with communists from Bangladesh or Namibia or Angola, I would talk to them, and they would say to me, "What is wrong with American communists? Why can't you guys have a mask? What is it? Why do American communists burn the American flag? Are you stupid? You're in the United States. You should claim the American flag for yourself. Why do you guys dress in ripped up jeans? Why don't you wear suits like real politicians? The Democrats wear suits, the Republicans wear suits. Why are you guys dressed like bums on the street?" Right? Why do you guys promote drugs? After the revolution in our country, the first thing we did is kill the drug dealers. Drugs are enemies of socialism. They knew that something was deeply wrong with American communists. Something is deeply wrong with American communists. I had known it in my guts before. But when I heard it from the real global communist movement at the World Festival of Youth and Students in 2013, that was the moment. That was the moment when I heard it from real communists who had real seats in parliament and real governments that they controlled. That was the beginning of the end of my movement days and the beginning of what became City Builders and Vandals in our age, what became the Center for Political Innovation. I understood that something was deeply wrong with American communists, but I couldn't put it into words. And I started to figure it out and to understand it. That was my breakthrough, and it was a great moment for me. And I really hope, we're launching the CPI on the West Coast. Register today, come and be part of it. There's another book in the works. I'm working on another book. It'll be a while though. I'm gonna, I don't want to rush things. You want things to come out and be good, but we're trying to do something new and exciting here. We're trying to do something new and exciting, something that's never been done before. Right? We need a real socialist movement. I'm not a political activist at this point. I just want to educate people. I know a lot. I read a lot. I write a lot. I give a lot of lectures. We need education. We need socialist education. We need a center for political innovation. And more than anything, what we need right now in the United States is a government of action that will fight for working families because too many people are suffering. Too many people have been left behind. It's not right what's happening to people out there. We need a government of action that will fight for working families more than anything. Folks, I am going to wrap this up. It's been fun. You've all been here, and I'm glad you're here. Please tweet this out. Please spread the word. If you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you click on that bell because people are not getting notifications. We want this to be as big as possible because this is unique. We're on a mission. We are on a mission. You and me and all of us, we are on a mission because we have to change political discourse in the United States. We have to change things. Things have got to be changed, right? We need to move toward a real, authentic, constructive socialism. More than anything in the United States, that's what we desperately need now. We need to beat back the synthetic left. We need to beat back the right wing and racism and bigotry and hate and militarism. We need to build a constructive socialist movement, right? We need to do it, and I can't do it alone. So come to the conference, please. I'm going to do one on the West Coast in September, right? That's being organized. Details are not yet available. We are on a mission. We have to do what needs to be done. We have to do what needs to be done. Shout out to Lawrence Chu. Glad you're with us up in Albany. We have to do what needs to be done. I can't wait to meet all of you. It's going to be an amazing, amazing conference, right? If you can't come, maybe you can donate some money. There's a donate button. Maybe you can donate to help the conference happen, right? There's a PayPal donate button. Send us some money to help kick off the conference. We need money to make it happen, right? But this is an exciting time we're living in. There's great potential. With great power comes great responsibility. It's the best of times. It's the worst of times, right? The moment is full of possibilities. Great things could happen, but only if people step in and do the right thing and seize the moment. I care about you all deeply. I put myself out there. I say things that make people angry. I'm just doing what needs to be done because you know the hour is getting late, as they say, right? You know, and the time for joking around, the time for just going along with failed policies is over. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. Too many people are suffering right now because of capitalism. So in that sense, thank you, Space Communist. It is appreciated. And thank you, Breyer, for your super chat as well. On that note, I will quote the words that I've ended my lives with every time. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Thank you, folks. Don't forget that I deeply care about all of you. We're doing something special here, but I can't do it without you.